Present, call to order the second session of the fall special town meeting. A couple of announcements before we begin. May we have quiet, please? There's a set of apparently lost car keys in the custody of the town clerk with a tag on them that says Hartford Life. If they're yours, you can get them from the town clerk. Tomorrow evening from 5 to 8 in Coolidge Corner and Brookline Village, the celebration First Light will take place, and the Selectmen and Advisory Committee will now make fools of themselves. I'd also like to announce that last night we had 225 town meeting members in attendance, which is almost 91% of the entire body, so you're to be congratulated for your diligence. On the announced votes, there were a couple of corrections after the votes that I announced. These are recorded votes under Article 12. On the referral motion, the correct tally is 66 in favor, 140 against, and 5 abstentions. On the main motion, the correct tally is 60 in favor, 147 against, and 10 abstentions. Finally, for those of you who didn't receive my email about speakers' time limits, I want to read it. Time limits have served us very well over the years as one of the ways to make matters move along at town meeting and to help speakers eliminate redundancy and superfluous material in their presentations. I'm somewhat relaxed about time limits under special circumstances, such as the Tom Hennessy article last night, but I require more discipline in the usual situations, especially those in which we have a controversial article with many speakers wishing to be heard on both sides. This was the case with Article 12 last night and will be the case with Articles 15 and 16 this evening. It's simply not fair to those of you who work to bring your presentations within our time limits for me to permit the less disciplined among you to exceed the prescribed time limits significantly. You may find this difficult to believe, but I derive as little pleasure about having to bear down on speakers who have exceeded their allotted time, as I'm sure those speakers do themselves. So I ask those of you who are scheduled to speak this evening to make a greater effort to comply with the 5-minute time limit that was the case in many instances last night. One helpful technique, which you can't very well carry out now, is to practice delivering your remarks prior to town meeting and editing them as necessary. All that said, I'll almost always grant requests for extra time if made ahead of time, and I encourage those of you who really don't think you can fit all of the important things that you have to say within 5 minutes to make such requests. Thank you for your patience. As you recall, we postponed consideration of Article 11 until this evening, so we will begin this evening's session with Article 11, and the motion under Article 11 is found on page 11-13 over to page 11-19. It's an amendment of the tobacco control bylaw to add e-cigarettes. It's moved by Ms. DeWitt, seconded by Dr. Vitolo. Dr. Vitolo.
Tommy Vitolo, town meeting member, Precinct 6, and naturally, right after the moderator's suggestion that we do a better job, I show up without any prepared remarks. But here we go. So warrant Article 11 proposes 5 changes to the tobacco control bylaw. The first involves e-cigarettes. Currently, e-cigarettes are not regulated by the state at all. A 13-year-old can walk into 7-Eleven and buy them. I think that's a problem. I think we should do better than that. In fact, I think that we should treat e-cigarettes like smoking tobacco, regarding rules of sale and regarding where they can be used. And so if this bylaw passes, e-cigarettes will be just like cigarettes with respect to town rules and regulations. Very simple, very straightforward. Change number 2 would increase the percentage of hotel rooms that must be smoke-free within a hotel from its current number of 90% to 100%. In practice, this will have no impact because the 2 hotels with 10 or more rooms already are 100% smoke-free, and town staff approached the Red Cab Hotel Development and the Cleveland Circle Hotel Development, and both have said they planned on being 100% smoke-free anyway. So let's go ahead and codify it in law. Number 3, the recently passed 400-foot buffer zone around this building that prohibits staff and students from smoking would be expanded to all tobacco products and e-cigarettes. And my thinking behind this is as follows. When the peer leaders last time around said, you know, we don't want the smoking in front of the high school, they made 3 specific arguments about it. Number 1, they said secondhand smoke is a problem. Now, smokeless tobacco, e-cigarettes, it's not a problem. But number 2, they said the folks who are using those harmful products, we want to make them walk. We want to make them walk 400 feet through the rain, so they think about whether or not this is such a good idea, and maybe every once in a while they won't have enough time to get their fix in before their next period, and they won't do it. And
So I hope you won't be stealing anybody's thunder here, Dr. Vertolo.
I assure you I won't. Wouldn't that be a good thing? The third argument that they made is, you know, we want to denormalize the use of tobacco products. We don't want other kids seeing it and thinking it's a good idea. Well, the second and the third argument apply just as well to chewing tobacco and just as well to e-cigarettes. So it seems to me if we think it's a good idea to have a 400-foot buffer zone for cigarettes, we should have it for the other tobacco products and e-cigarettes as well. The fourth change would completely prohibit self-service displays of tobacco products. Generally, the packs of smokes are behind the cashier, but sometimes they'll have cigarillos or other tobacco products on the counter. And the problem with this is young people who otherwise can't legally procure these products might get some sticky fingers. And so it's not a big deal to put them in a locked humidor or behind the counter, and it's sort of state-of-the-art tobacco control. It's a sensible, minor ask of the businesses, and so I think we should do it. And finally, because the Brookline tobacco control bylaw predates the state law in a number of ways, some of our fines and some of our definitions are in fact less strict than state law. State law came around later. They tightened it up a little bit. We never bothered to go back and make those technical changes. So for example, we redefine an employee and an employer in a workplace to exactly match the state law, which we have to enforce anyway. And we make sure the fines match the state fines, which we have to issue anyway. So it's a technical change, no real change in practice. Those are the 5 ideas. I think they're all pretty simple and straightforward, and I think they're all worth going forward on. So I urge you to vote favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the Brookline High School peer leaders. We'll have 7 minutes to present.
I forgot. I feel like I'm going to break it. Oh, whatever. Okay. Hi. Thank you, moderator and town meeting members, for giving us this opportunity to speak. We are here to speak in favor of warrant Article 11.
Could we have your name, please?
Sorry, my name is Maeve Kelly of 5080 Washington Street. I'm a junior and a peer leader at the high school. And in my experience at the high school, last year when we passed the buffer zone, the 400-foot buffer zone, kids were already in the hallways talking about how e-cigarettes didn't fit the rules, so they could already that's how they could get their fix of that cigarette sensation. So right now there's no regulations on where you can smoke e-cigarettes around the high school. And so I really think it's important that we pass this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nina Bellamont. Hi, my name is Nina Bellamarich. I live on 23 Conant Road. I'm a junior and a peer leader at the high school. In my experience, I've seen students switch out the nicotine in the e-cigs with marijuana, so it's another way of smoking pot under the radar. Thank you. I hope you support this bylaw.
My name is Omar Gafour, sophomore and Brookline peer leader, and live on 25 Stearns Road. And one of our main concerns here at the Brookline peer leadership is the fact that there is no age regulation for e-cigs, meaning that me and my 12-year-old sister could go to any convenience store and buy an e-cig. And the fact that anybody of any age can go and purchase an e-cig is just ridiculous for me, in my opinion, which is why I urge you guys to pass this law.
Alejandro Marin, 120 Rawson Road, Brookline peer leader. In my own experience, I've seen people who have never tried any source of tobacco product, any cigarettes or anything, try these new e-cigarettes because it's a new cool thing going around. I'm a part of the Brookline High School football team, and I've seen great athletes who have never even tried cigarettes or any tobacco product try these new e-cigarettes because it's really growing through the school. And not only it's growing through the high school, but also growing through the middle schools, which really isn't okay. So we think it is very important that you pass this warrant article to regulate e-cigarettes the same as tobacco to prevent teens from becoming addicted to nicotine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We can all take a lesson from these students who completed their presentation in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Ms. DeWitt.
Betsy DeWitt speaking for the Board of Selectmen, and I will try to be brief. Article 11 would amend the town's bylaws, as you've heard from Dr. Vitolo, to regulate e-cigarettes and other electronic nicotine devices, including prohibiting them in the 400-foot smoke-free zone around Brookline High School, to ban smoking in all hotel rooms, to prohibit self-service displays and access to tobacco products and e-cigarettes, and to bring the bylaw into alignment with the state statutes, definitions, and fines. E-cigarettes are being promoted and marketed as a safe alternative to tobacco. They're also being made to appeal particularly to young people with fruit flavors and mimicking popular cookie and candy flavors. However, it's not so clear that they're safe. Their primary content is nicotine. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, nicotine is just as addictive as cocaine and heroin. And according to the Surgeon General, nicotine can inhibit brain development in adolescence. In addition, the electronic devices are not regulated. So actual nicotine content in a cartridge can vary wildly. And furthermore, I think as you've heard from the peer group, the content might or might not be nicotine. Unfortunately, it appears that e-cigarettes have become cool among teenagers, and they may believe that they're a safe way to smoke compared to other products. We should all be proud that the article and the earlier article that created the smoke-free buffer zone have been supported and were initiated by the high school peer leaders and other students who have all been active advocates for this. The Brookline Board of Selectmen fully supports the change in the bylaw and recommends favorable action on the vote that begins on page 11-13.
Thank you, Ms. Humphrey. And Dr. Cohen, would you come forward, please?
Sietske Humphrey, Precinct 6, speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee. I won't repeat everything that has been said already. I wanted to mention that yesterday the Oxford Dictionary selected the word vape as the 2014 word of the year, which is certainly an indication of the coolness factor right now of vaping, or the delivery of liquid or solid nicotine in a variety of flavors through the e-cigarettes. Our high school peer leaders told us already that the use of e-cigarettes is seen as a substitute for smoked tobacco, but we know that Using them creates the same nicotine addiction as smoked tobacco. We support, the advisory committee supports Article 11 with a 23-0-1 vote. We look forward to the continued 100% free, smoke-free hotel rooms, and we're happy to know that the hotel projects that are planned are also planning to be 100% smoke-free, so there's no issue there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Bruce Cohen. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bruce Cohen, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 12, and also Chair of the Public Health Advisory Council. The Public Health Advisory Council held a public hearing on this article, and we voted unanimously to support this article on October 16th. I also want to acknowledge the peer leaders who will be receiving the Carlin Community Service Award for their civic engagement in promoting public health at the Friends of Public Health meeting in December. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. On the motion on page 11-13, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. We thankfully, and thank you to our contingent from Brookline High School for joining us this evening. I'm pleased to say that we disposed of Article 12 last night, and we proceed now to Article 13. Motion under Article 13 is for no action. It's moved by Ms. Nabel and seconded by Ms. Snyder. Ms. Snyder, or whichever of you would like to go first. Ms. Nabel?
Bobby Nabel, Town Meeting, Precinct 11. It may be helpful for you to know something about the particular case that led to the drafting of this warrant article. Ruth Ann Snyder and I became involved in this issue in 2011, when we both attended a Zoning Board of Appeals hearing. I, having chosen at random a hearing to learn more about ZBA issues and proceedings, and she, because she had been asked for advice by a constituent who was an abutter in the case, and because she thought that the granting of variances was of importance to the precinct as a whole. A fire had damaged the third floor and attic, a single unit, of a 3-unit condo. Both the building and planning departments denied the owner's application to rebuild as 2 separate units, each with its own entrance, since it did not meet zoning requirements. This was the same decision previously rendered a number of years before, when the building department had ruled dividing the units illegal. This time, the owner appealed to the ZBA. After a first hearing was continued, a second hearing, held in July 2011, was continued just before a vote on the appeal, with no date certain set for resuming the hearing. When we checked the ZBA site online this summer, before drafting our warrant article, there were no references to that appeal, no posting of minutes of the hearing, of continuances granted, and no record of whether a final decision had yet been rendered by the ZBA. There was no agreement about whether the appeal had been withdrawn or whether the continuance was still in effect. As far as the public record in the summer of 2014 was concerned, it was as if the appeal hadn't occurred. Our warrant article is intended to correct what we experienced as hindrances in the public's efforts to be informed about and to participate in the public process regarding Zoning Board of Appeals proceedings. Information about appeals brought before the ZBA are of importance not only to the petitioner who seeks to carry out a project, but also to abutters and other neighborhood residents whose enjoyment of their property and sometimes the monetary value of that property may be affected by the outcome. Failure to make such information available in a timely manner limits the ability of the public, including town meeting members who want to be informed about issues that affect their precincts, to participate in the hearing process. The intention of this bylaw amendment was to ensure that interested parties in cases brought before the ZBA are provided information at crucial times during the consideration of the appeal and after a decision has been reached, and to ensure that members of the public have access to the public records regarding those appeals within a reasonable time. Improved access by town meeting members and town residents to information about appeals would increase opportunities for them to participate in the appeals process. The Planning Department was recently assigned responsibility for, among other things, issues related to communication between the ZBA and various constituencies. It has been very sympathetic to the concerns that led to the drafting of Warrant Article 13, and has met with us a number of times to discuss implementation of improved procedures. As a result of these conversations, the Planning Department has instituted the following procedures intended to meet the needs of residents and town meeting members for timely information about hearing outcomes. Posting online a summary of ZBA hearing outcomes within 5 business days of the hearing, and posting approved minutes, usually within 21 days of the hearing. Minutes in draft form are available in the interim by request from the Planning and Community Development Department. We very much appreciate the willingness of the Planning Department to address our concerns, their consideration of suggestions we made, and their prompt implementation of measures to deal with issues raised in the warrant article. These changes address the elements of our warrant article, and for that reason, we move no action on the article. One last comment. As we discussed our warrant article with various town groups, people mentioned a need for improved communication and procedures related to planning and ZBA outside the areas addressed in our warrant article. And based on the welcoming response given our earlier concerns, and perhaps on the principle that no good deed goes unpunished, we look forward to raising those additional issues in future discussions with the Planning Department staff.
Thank you, Ms. Snyder. Okay, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9, co-chair of Brookline PACS with Frank Farlow, whose name I forgot to mention last night. I'm not here to disturb the peace tonight. I'm frankly here mostly to ask a question, but I knew this would go through very quickly with no recommendation for a vote, so I thought I should get on the speakers list to ask my question. And I brought this up at the Selectmen's hearing on this article. I commend the petitioners. This is a wonderful step getting this whole process looked at, and I added 2 more things to the equation at that hearing, and I wanted to reiterate them before this august body and ask whether the town officials will consider them as part of these discussions. And the 2 things were this. Going back earlier in the process than this article, I think, generally does, for neighbors and town meeting members to come into a planning board hearing, it would be much easier to have the plans online rather than have everybody bother Polly Selko to send them to them. And so that's number 1, is get the plan that's being discussed at the planning board available online so anyone can access it and send out the notice. And I'm also one of the parents of the electronic notice bylaw. Send out a notice saying how the neighbors and citizens and town meeting members can see those plans. To walk into one of those meetings without knowing what's being discussed is really impossible. And secondly, after the planning board does a recommendation, they do a report. Most of you may have, well, some of you may have seen that. That report should be accessible to the same interested people before they go to the ZBA hearing, because that gives the analysis by the planning board as to those plans. So those are my two requests, and my question is, will they be considered as part of this consideration process?
Ms. Steinfeld?
I'll take my seat and take my answer sitting down.
It's the best way, Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Allison Steinfeld, Planning Director. I had hoped that we would be able to post plans online almost immediately, but unfortunately, the town does not require that plans be submitted in electronic format. So clearly, that is something that we're going to continue to discuss with the building department, and hopefully in the future, it will be a requirement. If we do require it, though, we'll have to probably categorize what we do and don't require, in that we certainly don't want homeowners to have to submit an electronic file if they're just adding in a small addition to their home, for example, a porch. But that warrants further discussion. In terms of the planning board report, we do in fact put those online as soon as they are prepared. If there's any issue, obviously anyone can feel free to contact the Assistant Director for Regulatory Planning or myself, and we'll certainly make sure that they are in fact online. But we do systematically do so. So thank you very much, and I thank the petitioners as well.
Thank you. On the motion for no action, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. We have disposed of Article 14 and turned to Articles 15 and 16. We're going to debate both 15 and 16 together insofar as they each relate to the taxi medallion system, about which you will hear quite a bit more. The motion under Article 15 is found on page 1 of the pink supplement, over to middle of page 2. It's a resolution moved by Mr. Harris, seconded by Mr. Dempsey. The motion under Article 16 is the advisory committee's recommendation, also a resolution, on page 16-7 over to the bottom of page 16-9, and that's the red line version. You can find the clean version on pages 16-10 and 11. Moved by Mr. Bors, seconded by Mr. Lescoyer, and I call first on Mr. Harris, the principal petitioner under Article 15.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Harris, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8, and the petitioner of warrant Article 15. I would just like to start with some definitions. In a medallion system, there is one medallion per taxi. You cannot put a taxi on the road unless it has a medallion. Medallions are a financial asset, not a productive asset, that confer a permanent property interest that can endure for centuries in the medallion itself. Medallions create a new market with its own rules, separate from the market for the services taxis provide. Medallions currently sell for $600,000 plus in Boston and Cambridge, $350,000 in Somerville. Brookline bank officials conservatively estimate that a Brookline medallion would sell for $200,000 plus once a market is established. The only reason a medallion costs more than the simple cost of the vehicle licensing and inspection program that the medallion is attached to is when not enough of them are issued to meet the market demand for taxis. Medallions are by definition a program of scarcity by design or oligopoly. The main service justification for medallions is that, quote, if companies had medallions, they would go out and buy new vehicles, unquote. But this is true only if the medallions have an agreed upon value high enough to justify their use as collateral. And with the price of medallions now plummeting because of competition from app services like Lyft, Uber, etc., with no end in sight, conservative evaluations, that is, bankers' evaluations, have no benchmark. The word has already permeated the local industry that bankers in Boston are increasingly hesitant to issue loans against medallions. Finally, in the definitions section, only one segment
of the ride-for-hire industry requires medallions. To take them in reverse order, app services like Lyft and Uber, which you call on your smartphone, do not require medallions. Livery cars that you call either by your telephone or your smartphone do not require medallions. Taxis do not require medallions when you hail them either by telephone or smartphone. The only service advantage that medallions offer is they allow taxis to pick up street hail customers. Okay, that's my definition section, so we're all kind of on the same page. Regarding one major issue that Brookline is contemplating medallions, the possibility of the town getting money from the sale. I regard this as an ethical issue. The town regulates many private businesses in addition to taxis, school buses, daycare centers, delis, etc. The state regulates medical doctors, lawyers, real estate brokers, accountants. If we're going to medallionize one business, it is only fair if we medallionize them all. Every branch of government can make tons of money, we can solve all of our budgetary problems, or we can drive every one of these people out of the state or into the ground. Further, it is not even the entire ride-for-hire industry that would be medallionized. App services like Uber, for example, we know they're opposed to medallions. And as I've mentioned earlier, livery services, medallions are not required. It is only taxis that we're talking about medallionizing. Speaking as the son and grandson of small business people, I believe it is unethical to impose a unique financial obligation on a single branch of a single area of private enterprise of hardworking people trying simply to make a living by serving the citizens of Brookline. At the meetings of the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions, we learned that medallions were only proposed as a last resort to pay for vehicle upgrades. I propose to you that taxi medallions are completely unnecessary for that purpose. Nissan, Toyota, Dodge, Ford, and I'm sure other manufacturers offer updated models that would pass Brookline's quality standards.
You have 1 minute, Mr. Harris.
They retail, thank you, they retail for $30,000. Versions with full handicapped accessory cost another $30,000. Uber announced earlier this year that the median gross income for drivers who work 40 or more hours per week in New York City is $90,000 plus. In San Francisco is $71,000 plus. The point is, people who want to own and drive a taxi would be able to afford these costs. These are why Brookline drivers now are going to Uber. And again, I would note that the rest of the rides for hire industry, livery, app service, etc., manage to finance comparable vehicles without medallions. I submit this is proof medallions are not necessary to upgrade Brookline's taxi fleet. The best way to upgrade taxis in Brookline is simply to issue rigorous regulations concerning vehicle safety, comfort and environmental features, low gas mileage, etc., emissions, etc., driver skills, training and moral fitness, and liability insurance so customers are well covered in the event of an accident.
Please conclude, sir.
2 sentences, please. These are issues of quality control, not quantity control as a medallion system would impose. I cannot urge more strongly that tonight you vote yes on the revised resolution, warrant Article 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman. And Mr. Dempsey, would you come forward, please?
Good evening. I'm Mike Sandman, speaking for the Advisory Committee, and I'm past chair of the Transportation Board and a member of the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions. This is the 4th time I've spoken to town meeting about taxis. The first time I was the new Transportation Board chair, and separately from taxis, at that time residents were unhappy about the 2-hour limit on daytime parking. The Transportation Board asked DPW staff to redesign daytime parking, and we said, start with a clean piece of paper. And they came up with the resident and employee permits we now have. Not perfect, but certainly an improvement. And after the work of the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions, we're on the cusp of something similar. Starting with a clean piece of paper to redesign Brookline's rather shaky taxi industry. We'll still need to take the 2-page list of 25 things on which the Moderators Committee members agreed and build a good plan. For example, a hybrid of medallions and licenses may be better than all medallions or all licenses. The original impetus for selling taxi medallions was to raise money for the town and give owners a way to build capital in their businesses. We hired Richard LeCapra to design a plan, but 2 years elapsed and the plan wasn't implemented. Now we have deteriorating service and weak taxi companies, partly because of the delay. So the LeCapra plan is no longer the best way forward. So we're not done with the redesign, but the Moderators Committee made a lot of progress that the Transportation Board can follow up on. Therefore, the Advisory Committee recommends that you not support Article 15 in its original or amended form because it kills our design flexibility. We recommend you support Article 16, which preserves that flexibility. The materials sent out in support of Article 15 are a collection of mistaken conclusions compiled by well-meaning people, and those conclusions have been thrown around about like confetti. And I'd need an hour to clean up all those colorful bits, and I have 3 minutes left. 4 points. The proponents of Article 15 say that the town has no moral right or reason to cap the number of taxis, has no more right or reason to cap the number of taxis than it does to cap the number of restaurants. Not so. The town doesn't rent property to restaurants, but it owns the streets, and we regulate their use in many ways. We limit the number of taxis and rent the use of the streets to cabs for a $300 annual fee, far less than market value, because state law limits license fees to the cost of issuing them. Even a long-term license is subject to that limit. Medallions allow us to sell the right to operate taxis. Selling medallions sets a semi-permanent cap on the number of taxis. That may be good or bad, but it's not unethical or immoral. It's a decision about how to manage our assets. And by the way, there's one kind of restaurant we do set a cap on: food trucks. Why? Because food trucks operate on the public streets. We limit their number in order to limit their effect on traffic. We have that same right and duty with regard to the number of taxis. Number two, where it's said that we're not capable of setting the right number of cabs in the midst of a changing market. Not so. 12 years ago, the Transportation Board issued new licenses as a way to increase competition. But we knew then that we had more taxis than Brookline could support. Today, we know that Brookline can support somewhere between 100 and 120 taxis. Number three, you've heard concerns about the driver's inability to decide properly if medallions are a good investment. The drivers are immigrants. They don't understand the risk of loans. They don't understand Uber. Baloney. Immigrants, 3 of the 4 taxi companies are owned by immigrants. And drivers made it clear at the Moderators Committee hearing that they understand both Uber and medallions. You'll hear from a driver tonight, I hope. More than 40 experienced drivers are in line to buy medallions. Why? Because a medallion eliminates $35,000 in lease fees. $35,000. Article 15 proponents don't mention that. It far outweighs the cost of financing a medallion and the cost of buying and operating a new fuel-efficient vehicle. Article 15 doesn't protect drivers. It prevents them from becoming business owners. But is buying a medallion too risky? Bill McKenzie of Brookline Bank told the Moderators Committee that in 20-plus years and hundreds of medallion loans, not one owner-driver had defaulted. Not one.
You have 1 minute.
Number 4, some Article 15 proponents say that government in Brookline is not capable of properly managing the market for taxi services, and worse, much worse. At the top of page 15-4 of the combined reports, the Article 15 explanation says, in capital letters, medallion systems make corruption inevitable. I hope the proponents are too embarrassed to make that statement tonight, but it's an implied and unfair accusation directed against DPW and the police. That deep distrust of Brookline's governance is a cornerstone of the argument against selling medallions. We don't know what we're doing. Distrust in our ability to come up with good answers is the opposite of the way Brookline is run. The taxi business is in trouble today, but we can come up with a new structure that lasts, that works. My last sentence was not written by James Joyce. To do that, we need you to leave all our options open by voting no action on Article 15 and favorable action on 16.
Thank you, Mr. Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chris Dempsey, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I'm a member of the Green Caucus, which supports the passage of Article 15. I also speak as a former Assistant Secretary of Transportation in the Patrick administration, as a member of the Brookline Transportation Board, as a frequent user of Brookline taxis, Boston taxis, Uber, and Lyft, And I'll say, as someone who has immense trust and respect for Brookline's employees, its DPW, and its transportation staff. I urge my fellow town meeting members to support Article 15 so that we can move past this medallion misadventure and focus on the regulations that both sides of this debate agree are critical to a well-functioning taxi industry, especially given the dramatic upheaval that this industry has experienced over the last 3 years. The sole benefit of a medallion scheme is a one-time financial windfall, essentially moving cash flows from the future to the present and then splitting them between the town and the current operators. But countering that benefit are a host of costs that are far less tangible but no less real. If medallions are implemented as designed, as a means to protect incumbents and keep out competition, they will lead to worse service, higher prices, less innovation, and less opportunity for owner-operators. Medallions are not a free lunch, they are not a win-win-win, nor are they a tree that blooms dollar bills. Though if such a tree existed, I suspect we could get Mr. Levitan and the Green Caucus to agree to plant some more in Brookline. Let's put to rest the idea that it is impossible for business owners to invest when they require an annual license. Indeed, most regulated businesses work this way. Our restaurants certainly do, and they seem to have no problem investing, and taxis are no different. Washington, D.C., which does not have medallions, just recently was successful in implementing new regulations that require wheelchair accessibility, credit card machines, and dome lights that inform prospective passengers about a vehicle's availability. In discussing these upgrades, the Washington Post quoted an operator who had just invested $130,000 in vehicle upgrades, all without medallions. I'm voting for Article 15 because I support clear, robust, and flexible regulation of our taxi industry, which provides a critical service to so many in Brookline. By voting yes on Article 15, we send an unambiguous message to the Board of Selectmen and the Transportation Board that it is time to move beyond this misguided push for medallions and instead focus on how to best balance our community's shared goals for our taxi industry, including reasonable rates, fairness for workers, updated vehicles, improved reliability, and enhanced accessibility, to name just a few. This important conversation has been delayed and diverted for far too long as we have pursued a medallion scheme. Beginning in April 2013, I and others, including Mr. Salmon, invested many hours on a staff-appointed working group to develop draft taxi regulations in Brookline. We were very specific in that work. But the work was frozen in place as the medallion debate dragged on. Both medallion proponents and opponents on that working group agreed that it made little sense to continue in an environment of such uncertainty. By voting for Article 15, we can immediately restart this working group and develop and promulgate detailed regulations that address the concerns that many of us have about Brookline's taxi industry. Should Article 15 fail, we re-enter regulatory purgatory. Medallion proponents who once held up the LaCapra report as the unassailable work of the world's leading expert now agree that the plan is unworkable and that we should start with a clean sheet of paper. In the short term, we would be left with the status quo, a declining industry, a deteriorating service, frustrated industry stakeholders, and promises from medallion opponents that it will all get fixed when we get medallions. This status quo has hurt consumers, operators, and drivers at just the time when Uber and Lyft and other services have upended the industry. Frankly,
1 minute.
Frankly, it will be difficult to recover no matter how we vote on Articles 15 and 16. Neither warrant article is a panacea, and neither will guarantee the continued operation of all of our existing companies, or stem the tide of drivers away from Brookline taxis and towards services such as Uber and Lyft. It's not going to be pretty, though I am heartened that Mr. Salmon and I, who are at odds on this issue, traded emails today, committing ourselves to working together to improve the situation, no matter the outcome of these votes. But by voting for Article 15, town meeting can forge allies from adversaries and enable us to immediately restart the important work of developing specific, clear, robust, and flexible regulations that improve the passenger experience, provide opportunity to drivers, and end the regulatory purgatory that we have created for taxi operators. Please join me in voting yes on Article 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyszynski.
Neil Wyszynski for the Board of Selectmen. Our constituents expect that when they order or hail a cab, a clean, functional, safe taxi will arrive in a timely manner to take them where they need to go. They expect to arrive at their destination quickly, in one piece, at a reasonable, predictable fare. Sounds easy? Well, I guess it isn't. Our taxi industry is broken. The taxis are old and beat up, the owners are struggling, drivers are leaving, service is slipping. Part of the problem has been the uncertainty for the last couple of years of what the regulatory scheme for the industry in Brookline will be. The industry has been gearing up for medallions, which has been put on hold while we have this debate. Complicating things further has been competition from online services like Uber. It's clear that the industry is going through a period of change. So in this landscape, we need to make some decisions quickly because the status quo is not sustainable if we want to have a viable taxi industry. So a moderators committee has been studying the issue, as you've heard. And while they haven't agreed yet on a solution, they've laid out areas of agreement, disagreement, and options. At the risk of oversimplifying, key areas of agreement that I'd like to highlight are: one, that taxi service has value to residents and Uber is not a complete solution. In other words, we need the taxi industry to survive in Brookline. That's the bottom line. Two, the current yearly closed licensing system is not working. Three, medallions, and this is an area of agreement, medallions or some other equivalent permanent transferable right to operate is necessary to capitalize or recapitalize the industry. In other words, in order to borrow money to purchase vehicles, you need to demonstrate to the lender that you have the ability to generate income over the life of the loan. The current yearly license doesn't provide the longer-term assurance a lender needs. The collateral of a car is not sufficient to get an auto loan. On top of this, we have a fiscal reality that we've been giving away for a $300 yearly licensing fee, the right of a common carrier to accept passengers on our streets. Raising the fee beyond the cost of providing the regulatory service would be a violation of Proposition 2.5. Medallions are a way to monetize that right and benefit the town. We shouldn't just dismiss this fiscal fact as we're getting ready to put a Proposition 2.5 override on the ballot. The Moderators Committee has laid out three options: a medallion scheme, but different from the original so-called Le Capra scheme. And there are many possible variations. It could even include a combination of medallions and licenses, at least at the beginning, to test the waters. Another option they propose is an open license system, which somehow provides the foundation for a viable industry. I'm personally skeptical of that option, but I'm willing to have it flesh out. Or a continuation of some flavor of a closed licensing system, but with sufficient changes that provide the necessary foundation for sustainable industry. None of the options have been fleshed out to the point where they can be offered as a solution or recommended to the Transportation Board or the Board of Selectmen. Each option has its advantages and disadvantages. We believe it's premature to take any of the options off the table at this time, and also to throw out the possibility of significant town revenues. We ask you vote no action on the petitioner's motion. No matter how you vote on Article 15, we urge you to vote favorable action on Article 16. The motion before you is a resolution which urges that whatever the solution to the taxi conundrum, medallions, licensing, or some combination of the two, that the solution balance the need for a viable, safe industry which meets the needs of its customers.
You have 1 minute.
With, for the drivers, improved working conditions and a more secure future with an opportunity to own, and also that fees and staffing associated with taxi cab regulations safety be revised. These to us are common sense principles which should steer us in the right direction. I'd like to end by thanking the petitioners, first Mr. Harris, for changing the form of the motion to a resolution where we aren't using political capital to rescind legislation that we fought hard for. Though a resolution, the Board of Selectmen will honor it if passed. And, excuse me, to Mr. Lescoyer for reminding us that we shouldn't lose sight of the industry's customers and drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And Mr. Lescoyer, you're next.
My name is Anita Johnson. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 8. I am a career federal government lawyer. And begging your indulgence, I would like to quote from 5 government studies about legal restrictions on the number of taxi cabs. In 2011, the District of Columbia commissioned a study on whether to institute a taxi medallion system. These are all quotes from the studies that are out there. The study concluded a taxi medallion system institutes entry barriers to the taxicab market by restricting the supply of taxicabs. There is broad consensus among economists that such restrictions allow a small group of cab owners to earn windfall profits at the expense of taxicab riders and taxicab drivers. Limiting entry into a taxicab market leads to a decline in overall service. Riders pay higher fares, wait longer for an available cab, face more service refusals, and receive less service generally than they would otherwise. Service to outlying areas of the city become poorer. In order to meet the demand, an alternative off-the-books market may develop with poor safety, security, and insurance standards. Drivers who are forced to rent medallions from the taxi companies, and that's what the taxi companies require, rentals paid by each driver, earn very little after paying the very high medallion rents. High medallion rents wipe out any above normal earnings for the drivers who lease the medallions, and they deprive the owners of the chance of accumulating long-term wealth through ownership. Moreover, gains to the city from selling off medallions are one-time gains only. As a result of these one-time gains, future taxicab owners have to pay very high prices to buy a medallion, which virtually eliminates any possible above-market profits for future owners. Since all the revenue in the restricted taxicab market, even after years of demographic and economic growth, remain concentrated in a small number of hands, medallion owners fiercely resist any possible threat that may challenge their advantage. So the market becomes even less responsive to consumer needs in the long run. Second, a study by the OECD, an international economic progress and trade organization made up of 34 countries, conducted a lengthy study of taxicab restrictions. It concluded, rules that restrict the total number of taxicabs typically lead to an undersupply of services. It is widely accepted that restricting taxicab numbers constitutes an unjustifiable restriction on competition and reduces economic welfare. The economics literature provides little support on theoretical grounds for restrictions on the number of cabs. There is no widely accepted model for determining the optimum taxi supply to guide regulators' decision-making. There is a high risk, and this is the OECD, an international trade organization, a high risk that regulators will become unduly responsive to lobbying by taxicab companies and restrict the levels of taxicabs to far below free market equilibriums. There is, finally, no evidence that taxi drivers earn higher incomes in markets when the number of cabs are restricted. Rather, the monopoly rents that are charged by the owners due to these restrictions appear to go only to the owners. Finally, and you all are already aware of this, restricting entry to the taxicab industry causes significant equity problems since low-income groups are disproportionately high users of taxi services.
You have 1 minute.
The Federal Trade Commission is responsible for consumer protection and antitrust regulation in addition to the Justice Department. The Federal Trade Commission has conducted 3 major studies on our subject. The FTC issued a report to the City of New York on taxi medallions, saying that their system is effectively an engraved invitation to corruption. It concluded that limiting the number of taxi medallions inevitably leads to higher fares and reduced availability, and creates a class of people with a financial interest in regulatory decisions who are strongly motivated to influence the deliberative process. The FTC recommended to New York City, and I quote, "The restrictions of the taxi medallion system should be terminated at the earliest possible time." End quote.
Please conclude.
The FTC has also made a
No,
report
no,
for
that
the
doesn't
city of
sound like a
Boston.
conclusion to me, Ms. Please conclude.
Two more sentences, Mr.
Two more
Moderator.
sentences.
The FTC has also conducted a full study for the city of Boston with the same conclusions. The service deteriorates radically, and there are 2 other FTC studies over the years with similar conclusions. Accordingly, I don't think we should go there. Just say no to taxi medallions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lescoyer. Mr. Ellis, you'll be next.
It's David Lescoyer, Precinct 11. Mr. Moderator, Selectmen, fellow town meeting members, and ladies and gentlemen, this is really a complicated subject. I want to try to cut through the fog. Tonight, in this hall, the time has come, no more delay, no more postponements. We must make a decision about regulations for the taxi industry. Working conditions for drivers are deteriorating. Many drivers work 12 hours a day. The job can be dangerous. There are no benefits, no paid sick time, no paid vacation, no workman's compensation, no health insurance, no retirement. At the end of the day, there's less and less money. Drivers are quitting. New drivers are not taking their place. Fewer drivers, less service. Fewer drivers, less revenue for the companies. The taxi businesses are facing a financial death spiral. Unless we find remedies, Brookline could face difficult to accept or justify losses of taxi service that will be difficult for many in our community to bear. This could have political consequences down the road. You may recall that warrant Article 26 at the spring town meeting proposed repealing the home rule petition granting the town the authority to sell taxi medallion licenses. Warrant Article 26 was about concerns and objections to the sale of taxi medallions. There are valid reasons for these concerns. Taxi medallions have significant disadvantages as well as possible benefits. We should consider these disadvantages carefully and work together to find a resolution. However, warrant Article 26 and the current warrant Article 15 versions 1 and 2 as written would omit further dialogue among stakeholders and a chance for buy-in or problem solving. Instead, it's just say no without any indication about the next steps. To me, this is a clumsy strategy. Spring town meeting referred warrant Article 26 to a moderator's committee. The committee has worked over the summer and has recently produced a report. This report identifies 3 possible pathways and lists the pros and cons of each. I have attended all but one of the moderator's committee meetings and am grateful for the efforts of the members of this committee and feel that they have made an invaluable contribution to moving us along. The report, I believe, will be an excellent resource for the Transportation Board and the Board of Selectmen as these boards continue their efforts to address the current Brookline taxi industry difficulties. In late August, with warrant article filing deadline approaching and the outcome of the Moderators Committee then uncertain, I filed warrant Article 16. My concern after the Moderators Committee report, what would be the next step? In order to have a productive discussion about the plight of the Brookline taxi industry during the fall town meeting cycle, it would need, I felt, a positive, constructive warrant article with advisory committee and Board of Selectmen review and town meeting member consideration as a basis for future steps. Warrant Article 16, I believe, serves this purpose. It's a resolution. It advocates adding the working conditions of drivers to the other enumerated interests, including access for the elderly, persons with disabilities, carbon footprint, and revenue for the town. It also advocates increasing the license fees to enable the town to increase the regulatory and public safety staffing for taxis to meet the actual costs of regulating the industry. Here's an analogy. If nurses at a hospital were facing deteriorating working conditions and as a result were leaving the hospital, would you be comfortable about care at that hospital? What about stepping into a taxi cab in Brookline? We must address this situation.
You have 1 minute.
The advisory committee unanimously recommended favorable action on warrant Article 16, as did the Board of Selectmen. We must act now. Give taxi drivers hope. Give taxi businesses stability. Brookline residents will thank you for your vote. We can do this. Let's not be cynical. Our town boards are capable and ready to do their part. Stakeholders are pleading for leadership from the town. I believe we can do this. The first step is a favorable town meeting vote for warrant Article 16 tonight. The time has come. Now is the time to act. Be positive. Vote yes on warrant Article 16, no on 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And Mr. El Khoury, you'll be next.
Some slides coming in. Hi, I'm Chad Ellis, town meeting member for Precinct 12 and a member of the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions. The medallion debate can seem arcane and complex, but it's actually very simple. Taxi medallions fix the wrong problem and they make the real problem worse. We've all heard that Brookline's taxi industry can't afford to invest in new cars and that medallions will solve this problem by providing them with a capital injection. But investment doesn't follow capital, it follows profitability. First slide, please. The Brookline taxi industry has an income problem. Drivers aren't making enough to want to drive cabs, and operators are struggling to cover their costs. It's true that our operators lack capital, but that's an effect, not a root cause. If we solve the income problem, then $30,000 a car isn't going to be a barrier. And if we don't solve it, then a capital injection is just an unsustainable quick fix. Next slide. Medallions won't help with profitability, they'll make it worse. If you don't add revenue or reduce costs, you don't help with income. That's simple. If you add costs on top, you make the problem worse. Next slide. The annual cost to finance a medallion and a car is about $10,000 based on Brookline Bank's estimates. That's $10,000 per car per year. $10,000 here, $10,000 there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. Bear in mind that medallion proponents claim that $30,000 per car is more than our companies can possibly afford to invest. It's just not plausible that a business can't invest $30,000 but can absorb $10,000 in additional annual costs that are permanent. Next slide. Fortunately, we can help if we stop focusing on the wrong problem. Let me give you a quick example. Brookline's taxi business is seasonal. We need more cabs in winter than in summer. Our regulations should enable operators to adjust vehicle numbers to earn more revenues in winter or to reduce costs in the summer. We don't. Many towns and cities throughout the country have healthy taxi industries. We should focus on reforms that let operators think, act, and invest like normal businesses. And we should benchmark successful peer communities and work with operators to find changes that improve the taxi business without reducing value to consumers. Next slide. Taxi medallions are bad public policy. But should we shut them off as an option, or should we prefer a more open-minded approach as in Article 16? While I applaud the flexible and collaborative spirit of 16, it's time to say no to medallions. First of all, it's okay to take bad options off the table. If something makes the problem worse, it's good to focus on other things. Second, the quest for medallions has made the problem much worse. It's led companies to hold on to unprofitable licenses and prevented consolidation of fixed costs as operators have chased after medallion windfalls. Virtually every operator in Brookline told our committee that they'd be better off if we just fixed our regulations years ago and not bothered with medallions. The sooner we state clearly that medallions aren't going to happen, the sooner taxi companies can run their businesses as businesses rather than as lottery tickets. Even if you like medallions, next slide please. Even if you like medallions, enacting a workable plan quickly is extremely difficult. Just 6 months ago, you were asked to support implementation of the La Capra plan, a plan that took years to develop and yet had deep structural flaws that could have crippled our industry if it were implemented. That plan also envisioned 185 medallions at completion. Medallion advocates now say we would issue at most 120 medallions because of changes in the Brookline taxi market. Now, medallions are forever. You can add more, but you can't take them away. How can we know the right number given everything that's happening in the taxi industry? If we issue 120 medallions and 2 years from now the right answer is 100 or 80, we'll have an industry that has taken on significant debt and has structural overcapacity. Today's investment problems will pale by comparison. Taxi medallions are an unsustainable quick fix for the wrong problem that will make our medium and long-term situation worse.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. The only reason to consider them is to provide a windfall for the town. I recognize how attractive that money is. I served on the Override Study Committee, and I want money for the town too, even if it's less money than was originally hoped for medallions. But not this money, not at this cost. I was proud to join town meeting because I've seen how Brookline aspires to make good public policy with a long-term view. It's this approach that has made Brookline such a great place to live and to raise a family and kept our finances so sound. Adopting a bad policy in order to secure a quick windfall isn't the Brookline way. Please vote favorable action on Article 15. Put us on the path to a sustainable and healthy taxi industry that can serve all of Brookline's needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. El Khoury.
Good evening. My name is Hamid Al Khoury. I have lived on Summit Avenue in Brookline for the past 6 years, and I've been running a taxi company known as Hello Taxi for the past 12 years. I want to start by thanking Mr. Moderator for giving me the opportunity to address the town meeting member on behalf of the taxi companies in Brookline. First, allow me to tell you how we got here as an industry. The opportunity came to us in 2002 when the town wanted to create competition to improve taxi services in Brookline. I was 32 years old then, now I'm 44. The town started discussion on changing the current licensing system to medallion system even before I was in business, and became serious about it in 2008. Hired 2 different professional consultants and spent tens of thousands of dollars to study the industry. We as operator had dozens of meetings with the consultant. They came to our offices, viewed financial document, they met with the drivers, and came up with the medallion system proposal that gained the support of the Board of Selectmen, Board of Transportation, Advisory Committee, all taxi operator, and majority of taxi drivers. The longer process of discussions and negotiation was based on how to convert to medallion system, not whether to convert to medallion system. Throughout the entire process, I have met many wonderful people who served on the Board of Transportation, Administrative Office, Police Station, including the current member of the Taxi Moderator Committee, and I want to thank all of them for their time and effort. Regardless of whether at times I agreed or disagreed with their views and positions, I always felt they had good intention and acted in good faith. It was based on the idea that some kind of medallion system would be implemented, that all taxi companies made commitment and financial decision to continue operating. And in my case, I put my life saving into the company to stay open. Then last May, John Harris filed Article 26 and put a stop in the whole process. And now we find ourselves debating whether or not to implement the medallion system at all. As you can see, we have come full circle. Both Article 15 and 16 agree that the current system is not working and that the industry is in desperate need for improvement, and those improvements cost money. The question then becomes, which of those 2 proposed Articles, 15 or 16, provide the best way to get to this improvement? Let me tell you a bit about Article 15. Some of the members of Moderator Committee who support Article 15 have publicly said they don't know much about the taxi industry. They may talk to you about innovation and other great ideas that the town should adopt within the licensing system. However, when they were asked how to pay for this idea, there is no concrete answer. Their recommendation is based purely on personal beliefs. They may also give you a comparison that licensing system exists in towns similar size to Brookline, but they won't tell you what the working conditions are. The reason license system exists in other small towns is that they do not have the luxury to choose a medallion system. We have that luxury not because of the size of the town, but rather due to the geographic location. In fact, most major cities in the US have adopted a medallion system. There must be a reason for that. Article 16 keeps the proposal to convert to medallion in play, so we'll be able to pay for necessary improvement and modification that are needed to be able to compete and also create revenue for the town. It's very simple. People who you want to be interested in investing in this industry are not interested in investing in anything that is not called medallion. That's the truth. Furthermore, it will attract good drivers that are desperately needed here. But above all, it has the approval and the support of the Board of Selectmen, the Advisory Committee, 3 consecutive chairmen of the Board of Transportation, all taxi operators, and majority, if not of all taxi drivers. I trust you will do the right thing here. Please vote no on Article 15 and yes on Article 16. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kushner.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Kushner. I'm a member of the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions. I believe I was invited to join that committee due to my experience in finance, and I also drove a cab for 2.5 years in a previous life. I think the medallion debate is really a red herring and a distraction to the real issues that the town has to face as a prerequisite for a strong and viable taxi service in Brookline. The first is, by any reasonable measure, we have far too many taxis in Brookline. The oversupply of taxis is directly responsible for the diminishment in quality, safety, and ultimately the supply of taxis. It's important to note that the taxi market is really 2 markets. The first market is the market of drivers to passengers, and the second market is a market of drivers to taxi owners. The effect of too many taxis was initially to reduce the number of fares for each driver. The owners leased their cars to drivers at a fixed rate, so the owners weren't initially impacted by the oversupply. Of course, as reasonable people, as you would expect, taxi drivers earning less and less money began to seek alternate employment, and the number of leases sold by the owners began to decline. It was only then that this matter became of great importance to the owners as well as for passengers in Brookline. Owners began to lose money, and passengers faced increased wait times. The number of taxis needs to be reduced, either by town action or through the marketplace, and it's my belief that the market is much more likely to correctly determine the amount of taxis needed. But more importantly, the town has abjectly failed in its responsibility to correctly regulate the taxi industry. Regulations haven't been updated in over a decade, as you know, and what regulations there are have not been effectively enforced. To make matters worse, various individuals affiliated with the town have made representations to owners and drivers about regulatory changes and about the issuance of medallions in particular. After over a decade of no follow-through, the town has near zero credibility with anyone who's involved or may wish to be involved with the industry in Brookline. The issuance of fair, balanced, transparent, and most importantly, enforceable regulations is a mandatory prerequisite for the taxi industry to be viable. The town must also allocate funds for real enforcement, whether those funds come from licensing or from the general fund. There is no other option. That being said, that the town has not done a good job of enforcement and has made certain representations is not a sufficient reason to issue medallions. Medallions are one of a number of solutions, all of which will require the same regulatory regime. The only public policy goal that's supported exclusively by the issuance of medallions is to raise money for the town. Let me put it another way. There's really only one reason to support the issuance of medallions, and that's to create a one-time windfall for the town. If you believe that this is the most important outcome of the process, then you should vote against warrant Article 15. You should also be aware that depending on the structure of the auction for medallions, the actual result may be a lot or a little money for the town. It's uncertain. There also may be a small or no windfall or a large windfall for the incumbent owners. You also have to be aware that the issuance of medallions will increase the cost of entry in comparison to just licenses for any participant who comes later and will not benefit drivers in any way. This is because all medallions do is bring the future value of the taxi industry to the present. So let me quickly highlight the case, I believe, against medallions. I'll be facetious here. Issuing medallions is like using nuclear weapons to kill ants. It's heavy-handed, and it would be impossible to amend in reverse or a later date. You will tie the hands of the town in future regulation. Medallions are a permanent right to operate that would be given at the moment of greatest transition in the history of the taxi industry. This is an unquantifiable risk to all of the participants. Medallions only will create borrowing capacity for anybody who purchases a medallion at below fair market value price.
1 minute.
Yep, thank you. For any other purchaser, there's no creation of borrowing capacity. There's no magic way to finance new vehicles through medallions. While incumbents claim they cannot raise capital without medallions, it doesn't mean that there's no capital available without medallions. Many other cities have modern taxi fleets without a medallion regime, and other people will come and fill the void if the incumbents cannot finance vehicles. Contrary to what others may say here, in all cases, medallions will increase the cost of entry to the marketplace, making it more difficult for owner-operators. And what I mean by this is drivers to enter this market. That's plain and simply due to the cost of acquiring medallion, which will be above and beyond the cost of a vehicle. In all markets with medallions, and there are actually very few cities that have medallions, there is extreme concentration of ownership. Again, detrimental to drivers.
Please conclude, sir.
Medallions are being portrayed as many as the only solution to the Brookline taxi problem. In reality, they are one solution, but with the greatest long-term consequences and the least flexibility. Unless you only seek to raise revenue for the town through this process, you should support warrant Article 15. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Safer.
I'm Josh Safer, town meeting member from Precinct 16. I'm also chair of the Transportation Board. I was also chair of the Moderators Committee for Taxi Medallions. I have two hats for what I'm about to say. One as chair of the Moderators Committee, and the second as a fellow town meeting member with more of an opinion. And so I'm going to divide my remarks, therefore, into two parts with this visual aid. Starting as chair of the Moderators Committee. The first thing I want to do is thank the other members of the Moderators Committee, as well as the members of the public and the stakeholders who attended our meetings. The views are widely divergent and emotional for many, but the committee was able to remain thoughtful and deliberative. Although we were completely evenly divided among the so-called pro and anti-medallion camps, we were able to achieve our secondary agenda of narrowing the points you should be considering when we vote tonight. And so that can be stated in two ways here. First, virtually all concerns for increased regulation to achieve goals with regard to quality of taxicabs, quality of service, and the like are part of the regulation which the Transportation Board will work to enact no matter how this vote goes. In fact, we were already considering such regulation in spring, and a very complete draft already exists, which will continue to be deliberated and on which you can comment. Similarly, concerns relating to protection of drivers are primarily being controlled at the state level, something which should be, and by good coincidence is, under active discussion at the state level, but which will not be different among the plans we are discussing tonight. Therefore, the chief question before you is simply whether we should trade cash for medallions in exchange for that increased right we will be conferring on those owners. Things to consider when making that determination: whether you believe the existing companies can afford the changes we want to mandate without some degree of that cash infusion. The medallion proposals in the past, along with a simpler auction proposal that's a part of our report, include mechanisms to divert some of the new cash to the existing owners for that purpose. Our goals might also be achieved with new, better funded owners with an open licensing system. And then you have to think whether we have any loyalty to our current industry in deciding between those two ways to come to the same benefit for the town. Are we more concerned, the second thing is, are we more concerned about litigation in the transition from the existing owners who feel that they may have commitments, or are we more concerned about litigation perhaps downstream from medallion owners on whom we will confer a right and might come after us if things go awry? And three, are we concerned about a gap in service if the current industry starts to fail even before it can be replaced? Okay, switching to myself as a town meeting member. I believe personally that both paths forward, open licensing and open auction, will prove workable and governable and we will be able to provide good service. However, I support medallions as simply the more practical option for us now. Medallions would provide the town with a one-time multi-million-dollar infusion. I can be convinced of its value, especially if we trust that the infusion will be appropriately maintained, recognizing that it is one-time in its nature. As well, the cash from the medallions may be necessary grease to transition us to the system that we want by getting the buy-in from the existing industry. The medallion option, which permits that cash infusion like I spoke about to the industry,
You have
may
1 minute.
result in an easier transition along with that windfall for the town. Medallions may be imperfect, but I trust our ability to appropriately regulate them in a transparent fashion. I am open philosophically to an open license system, but my fear with an open license system is that it may be too fickle and offer too much flexibility with easy entrance and exit. I actually prefer the more cumbersome process like medallions would provide that give incentive to owners to suffer through lean times for the better times down the road. My fear being that there might be times with an open license system where we might have gaps in service. Therefore, my view is that we should vote no action on Article 15, which precludes those medallions, and I think we should vote in favor of Article 16, as it does serve as a list of the concerns that we should indeed be considering, us on the Transportation Board and the Board of Selectmen in addition, in determining our priorities as we roll out the medallion system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. No. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the luxury this evening of having only 3 more articles after this one. I have 4 more speakers, and I think each speaker is contributing something different and relevant to the conversation, at least so far. Mr. Polenbaum, and then we'll hear from a taxi driver.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. Ian Polenbaum from your host precinct number 6. There's been a lot of email traffic on this topic, much of it impenetrable. Those of you who did wade through them might have caught one rather succinct one from a former school superintendent who said simply, we got to do this, we got to sell medallions, we need the money. Now, a couple of town meetings ago, I very valiantly stood together with Dr. Sperber on a different issue related to the old Lincoln School. And turned out everybody from the selectmen to the advisory to the school board to the school department to the measurers of wood and bark came up to the microphone. And first they expressed deep respect for Bob. They didn't care about me. And then they completely crushed us. So I hope I figured out how to be on the winning side of this one, which is to reaffirm my own respect for Dr. Sperber, but say that I think he's wrong on this. And I say that seriously. I'm perhaps the only non-expert person speaking on this. I don't have economic background or taxi background or transportation background, but it just seems like there's so many downsides to medallions that aren't offset by the one-time cash infusion. It also seems bizarre, and maybe people just assume that the taxi industry is appropriate for this because it's been done in places like Boston and New York, but it just seems bizarre and unnecessary to subject one sector of the economy, one industry, to this kind of manipulation and exclusivity. Why aren't we doing that with burrito places in Brookline? There are plenty of them. Cap those, make somebody buy the right to it, make them capitalize the industry that way. The medallion system, wherever they've been tried, they don't help the customers with quality of service. They don't help public confidence in the system and in government functioning cleanly and transparently. And you don't have to be cynical about our own excellent and honest town officials to see that taxi medallions are a dirty business wherever they have happened. And we don't need them here. There's no compelling reason to bring them here. They don't help the environment. They don't help with ensuring better quality vehicles, lower emission vehicles, better service, non-discrimination. None of those things are things that medallions can do that aggressive and comprehensive regulation without medallions can't do. They don't seem to help anybody but the exclusive group of medallion owners, and those are overwhelmingly not the drivers. I mean, everyone has a story of a struggling owner-driver who manages to raise enough money, but that's not the way it's played out elsewhere. And so we come back to the one-time infusion, and we've seen estimates of 5 million, 7 million, 10, 12, even up to 15 million if the medallions fetch the right price. Sounds like a lot of money. It's hard to pass up. It's almost as much as I make in a week working for the state. But we have a $250,000 budget every year, and even the most optimistic figure of 12 or 15 million measured against $250,000 every year. That might ease the pain on something that particular year. It's not going to save us from an override. I hope nobody's out there telling their constituents, well, if we get medallions, maybe we won't raise your property taxes. That's not going to make the difference, and it's not worth that one-time cash infusion. Thank you.
Mr. Gillis.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Don Fred Gillis. I live in Malden, Massachusetts. I have been driving a taxi in Brookline for 25 years. Even though I don't live in this town, but I spent most of my life in this town. But I have to tell you, in recent years, some of my friends have left to drive in Boston, Cambridge, and mainly for Uber. They have left in part because business is less. But they have left because they have lost hopes in what has been happening to this issue. In 2007, when the town started the process of reforming the taxi industry, the town started with us, the drivers. We were happy. We thought finally our time was coming. But it has been 7 years in the making. Some drivers have left, but drivers like me, we are still holding on to the hope that it will happen. By the way, even those drivers who left, they keep calling me to inquire about this issue. They keep renewing their Acne licenses. Those drivers, they are like reserve players on the sideline waiting to join the team. As a matter of fact, I have some of them here who drive for Uber, but who is here tonight hoping the issue will pass. I was told that tonight the issue is in your hands. Please, I'm asking you to understand that drivers like me and others who have spent most of our lives driving a taxi in this city, in this town, deserve an opportunity to own a medallion, like those drivers in Cambridge, Boston, and so on. And I'm not here to speak on behalf of the owners, but I'm here to speak on behalf of the drivers. Please, I'm asking you to give me a chance to vote no on Article 15, yes on Article 16. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Levitan.
I'm Fred Levitan, town meeting member from Precinct 14 and a member of the advisory committee, but I speak as a town meeting member tonight. Chad said tonight that taxi cabs are simple. I guess he's a lot smarter than I am, because this is not a simple issue. This is an issue that I've lived with for 20 years, since 1994 when we first started to discuss this. And we've done a real disservice to the taxi cab owners and to the drivers in this town by allowing this to go on so many years. And I'm very pleased that the moderator has allowed this last iteration of this article to turn into an up or down vote, because it's time to have an up or down vote. However you vote, it's time to end this, either to issue medallions or to not issue medallions. Let's move on. Let's stop talking about it. It's just we've wasted too much time and too much energy. So we had a moderators committee this year, 4 very smart persons who worked all summer and who met through the summer and I think put in more effort than they ever thought that they would have to in order to try and come up with a solution. And they've come pretty close. I mean, I think we're pretty close to understanding the Uber effect on taxi cabs and how it affects the town. But the thing I want to say is when we started this, we were looking for money. We were looking for money for the town, and we tried to find a way to raise money through the sale of medallions to the taxi cab owners. They asked us for this. The owners and the drivers have been requesting for years that we implement a system where they can go to their bank, their local bank, happens to be Brookline Savings Bank, and get a loan to have a business. We just heard from a driver who's been here for 25 years in the town. All he wants is a chance to have a stake in this business. I think we make a mistake. When you call a plumber to come to your house to fix a leaking pipe, you don't tell him to leave his torch behind. You tell him to bring all of his tools. You hope he brings all of his tools. I think that we have a good board of selectmen and a good transportation board and a real good transportation chair that can straighten this out. Please do not take all the tools away. Leave medallions in the toolbox. Let them figure out what they want to do, and let's move forward. I ask you to vote no on Article 15 and yes on 16. 16 takes all of the ideals that we thought about and town meeting thought about in forming this new system and moving to medallions. And what David did is he added one other thing, the welfare of the driver. It's very important. It's what town meeting should want, and I believe it is what it wants. So I ask you to vote yes on 16. I think it's important, and no on 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sperber. We're going to hear from Dr. Sperber first.
Different cane and different eyeglasses so I can see what I'm doing. I'm Bob Sperber, Precinct 6. I'm the other non-expert on taxis, along with my colleague Ian Pollenbaum. In an effort to simplify what has become a complex problem, I offer the following proposal. First, the taxi owners, as we've heard tonight, have informed the Moderators Committee on Taxi Medallions that without medallions, they will leave Brookline. We've heard from the driver, representing the drivers, who pleads, in fact, that he wants the opportunity to purchase medallions. Second, the conservative estimate from the one-time sale of medallions is $10 million. If the town uses $3.6 million of the $10 million for the operating override, we can have the superintendent's 90% plan for the same cost of his 65% plan, thus improving the chances of the operating override passing. Third, since money is fungible, the passage of the operating override will help the regular budget take care of the needs of the police department, the fire, libraries, parks and recreation, public works, and the health department. Thus, with all town services properly funded, with our AAA rating intact, and given our excellent location, the value of our homes and condos will continue to rise. Please join a unanimous Board of Selectmen, a unanimous advisory committee, vote no action on 15, and yes on 16. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Rosenthal, you're the only person at a microphone. I have no other speakers. Do you promise to be brief?
I have a question, yes. I'll be even briefer than my last speech.
All right, after which, whoops.
Right here.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Rosenthal.
I was impressed by Anita Johnson's speech and also by the studies that Paul Harris gave us at pages 5 to 11 of the supplementary handout. And I'm wondering if the proponents, am I missing something, or is there nothing in our material from the proponents of medallions of comparable experts or studies saying the medallion system works? I'm a great fan of Paul Krugman, and his comment was quite telling to me.
Yeah, Mr. Sandman. Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say, I listened to Anita Johnson's reading of the Federal Trade Commission and OECD, was it? Am I correct about that? And I was thinking about the holes that I heard in it, and I said earlier that the proponents of Article 15 have scattered conclusions like confetti, and it takes a very long time to pick them up. The one thing I can say to you in the short time that I want to take here is that there are indeed holes in those arguments, and most of them relate to the assumptions about the regulatory environment that accompany medallions. And I'll repeat what I said at the very end of my talk. Brookline government, we are the government, you are the government, and the people that we have on staff are, in combination with the very active citizens that we have, capable of putting together a regulatory environment that will solve the problems that were identified in those reports.
So I take that as a no?
Yes, take that as a no.
Yes, sir.
David Mickley, town meeting member, precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, last town meeting we heard that the LaCapa report was done by the world's expert on medallions and that this was our best path forward until we heard that it's no longer workable now. What assurances do we have from taxi medallion proponents that any future medallion proposal will be better than what we heard last time? Will Mr. LaCapa be hired again, or will we rely on different experts this time?
Mr. Sandman.
I think I'm the default taxi medallion answer here. There's a lever on my back. If you pull it down, little thing pops up, says $1.45, and the meter starts ticking. Well, the answer is that the LaCapa plan, in my view at least, was the right plan at the time it was proposed, but it's 2 years old. And even 6 months ago, we didn't really fully understand where Uber was going to settle, what the equilibrium was going to be. And at that point, the industry itself wasn't in such tough shape. The industry is now, partly because of Uber, partly because of delay, as I've said. We don't have a specific plan. Mr. Kushner on the Moderators Committee did a very fine job of designing the framework of an alternative. And what we would need to do is carry that framework forward if we are going to go forward with medallions. And whether or not 15 passes, that's not 100% certain. But if we are going to go forward, we have to take that framework, possibly consult with somebody outside, but I think actually we have found the skills and have developed the expertise internally to be able to put something together that will work.
Okay, I think that's an adequate answer. Mr. Brown?
Cliff Brown, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 14. I actually have 4 questions. I'll try to make them very brief. They're all for the proponents. If we have a closed system now and we're going to consider medallions, they both limit supply. Why is there the inference that medallions would be different? The town sets the rates for the taxis, not the market, at least currently in Brookline. How is it that medallions per se would change that equation and lead to higher taxi rates by themselves?
Well, I think you better ask your questions one at a time, Mr.
Fine.
Brown, and
Thank you.
we'll see if we can't get answers for you.
That's for the proponents.
Right, that's a question for the proponents, I think.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Mr. Harris?
For Mr. Harris. For Mr. Harris. For Mr. Harris.
Yeah. Would you restate the question, Mr. Brown, into the microphone?
Is there a reason why Mr. Harris can't ask me to answer questions when we've worked on this together?
Well,
is he the proponent?
Whichever of you wish. He asked the question for the proponents of Article 15.
I believe he asked the question of you, Mr. Moderator. Is that not
Well, he addresses the question to me because that's the rule. I choose whoever responds, and either one of you can respond, whichever you decide.
Hey, Cliff.
So would you restate the question, Mr. Brown?
Sure. In a current closed system, why is there the inference that medallions would restrict supply, but the current system wouldn't?
I think that's a very fair question. There's roughly 3 possible ways you can structure the taxi business. We currently have a closed license system, which, as you point out, restricts as a medallion does. The main difference there is that medallions are permanent. It's much more difficult it's almost impossible to reduce, and other communities have found it is generally more difficult to increase the number of medallions that are out there. But structurally, you're correct. It would only be less restricted if we changed to an open system, which is not something that the article actually calls for. That would be up to the Transportation Board.
Next question.
Thank you. The town sets the taxi rates, not the market, at least currently. How is it that medallions per se would change that and lead to higher rates, as has been suggested?
Because there's no free lunch. So if you add a cost to the industry, if you envision a medallion system and then you put next to it a system without medallions that doesn't have that additional cost, that other system either has lower rates or it has higher returns to the drivers or the owner-operators. And so you don't magically have to have higher rates, but you have to pay for it somewhere. You're either going to have lower returns, which means less investment or less attractive people coming in, or you're going to have higher fares. And there have been studies of this that have shown that medallion systems do overall lead to higher fares.
Next question.
Sure. Medallions are an asset, as has been said. There's the suggestion that they reflect future rents, present value, just like any financial asset or any asset that depends on rents. Office buildings, you sell an office building, the new buyer, they're looking at future value. Why is there a suggestion that there's a one-time opportunity only for medallions when in the future they're tradable, they have traded, and anyone who's buying them is looking at future income? Why is there a suggestion that it's just a one-time windfall?
Well, I think the analogy you drew to a building is a good one. A building is a productive asset. You actually use it, and it adds to what you're able to do. A medallion is purely a financial asset that does literally nothing to affect your ability to drive a cab. And so it is really equivalent to saying, if you want to drive a cab, you have to buy an ingot of gold, and then that ingot of gold is attached to your business. And when you retire, you can sell the ingot of gold. It could go up in value, it could go down in value, but it has nothing to do with your ability to drive a cab.
Well,
Next question.
Okay, I disagree with that conclusion. Medallions, on the moral issue of monetizing assets, town assets, which is something that was raised very early on, the town monetizes assets all the time. The town sold excess real estate on Fisher Hill to pay for an affordable housing project there. Why is that more moral than selling assets here to also benefit the town?
Well, I think, like a lot of moral arguments, the answers are a little bit less objective. I think what I would say is that when the town sells property, it's selling something that it owns. When the town sells the future revenues of a business, I think it's selling something that it does not own. The state gives us the authority to do this. The argument has been made that since we own the streets, we therefore do own the right to drive taxis. I would submit that anyone here whose business depends on using the streets might be surprised to find out that the town had the right to claim ownership of that business. So it's an ethical and moral question. I think everyone here will have their own opinion on that.
Thank you. Mr. Selwyn?
Thank you.
This will be the last question, I promise you. Then we'll take the motion if we need to.
Lee Selwyn, town meeting member.
Into the microphone, sir.
Sorry. Lee Selwyn, town meeting member, precinct 13, and I was a member of the Override Study Committee, so I was interested in Dr. Sperber's comment about the possible use of the one-time revenues from the sale of medallions to fund a one-year operating revenue shortfall in the school department, which I find to be a rather fiscally irresponsible option because you shouldn't be taking a one-time revenue source and using it for a one-year purpose. I'm curious if the proponents of medallions have given any thought or can enlighten us as to how the money would be used. Would it be used to fund any one-year type of operating expense, as Dr. Sperber has suggested?
Okay, Mr. Sandman.
All right, let's flip the little meter up. My eyes will now register $1.45. The answer is that when the original discussion about what to do with the funds was raised, we were very cognizant on the advisory committee, and for that matter, previously on the town administrators working group on taxi medallions a couple of years ago, that the best use of those funds was probably to reserve them for something like reducing OPEBs, reducing our long-term pension benefits. There's been no discussion at all about earmarking them for anything that is an operating or annual expense.
Thank you. Well, seeing no one at the microphones, and I have no one else signed up to speak, we're ready to vote on Article 15. I can't imagine why you're coming to a microphone. If there are 35 people who would like an electronic vote, we'll have one.
Please make sure they know. Standing vote, recorded vote.
Well, we'll take an electronic vote because there are 35 people. This is on the motion on the page 1 of the pink supplement under Article 15. It's Mr. Harris's motion. And this is Article 15 main motion. I remind you that only the buttons with the number 1, 2, or 3 will record your vote. Anytime you're ready. Okay, all those in favor, please stand and press 1. Those opposed, stand and press 2. Motion carries by a vote of 110 in favor, 83 opposed, and 7 abstentions. Article 16. On page 16-7 at the bottom. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries. Article 17. The motion under Article 17 is on page 17-7, moved by Ms. Benka, seconded by Mr. Franco, that the town adopt the resolution set forth on page 17-7 relating to town lighting. Ms. Stamford?
I'm Claire Stamford, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 5, and along with Heather Hamilton from Precinct 3, we're the petitioners for Article 17 concerning LED lighting. Mr. Moderator, Selectmen, and Advisory Board, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak about this at Town Meeting. I'm also a member of the Green Caucus, and as an enthusiastic supporter of the town's decision to transition all town lighting to light-emitting diode, commonly referred to as LED lighting, I was concerned to learn that exposure to wavelengths of light emitted by some LED lighting may affect human health. I asked our Director of Public Health, Dr. Alan Balsam, what he thought, and he explained to me that this issue was being raised in meetings that he attended for public health directors around the country. To obtain more information directly relevant to human health, we consulted Dr. Stephen Lockley of the Division of Sleep and Circadian Disorders at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Concerned about how light can affect human health, in 2012, the American Medical Association published a policy statement on nighttime lighting. They note, quote, "Biological adaptation to the sun has evolved over billions of years. The power to override the natural cycle of light and dark is a recent event," unquote. We and virtually every other life form on Earth have developed in ways that adapt to our Earth day. The natural 24-hour cycle of light and dark is necessary for us to maintain our normal circadian daily rhythm, which affects our biological processes. To maintain this normal rhythm, we must reset our own biological clocks daily. This occurs when we are in darkness at night and in sunlight during the day. However, when we are exposed to bright light at night, our brain thinks we are in daytime and induces changes in our body that are associated with daytime physiology. This includes suppressing the darkness hormone melatonin. Our brain resets our biological clock for daytime, even though it is night. Bright light at night alerts the brain, makes it harder to fall asleep or have good quality sleep. Short wavelength, blue, visible range light is the most effective in causing these effects that prepare us for daytime. Thus, when we select nighttime lighting, we need to select light richer in the longer wavelength, red, visible range light, so as not to cause these changes in our brain which confuse night with day. Also necessary for our normal circadian rhythm is to be exposed to full-spectrum sunlight during the day. Natural daylight includes all the wavelengths of light, including the shorter blue wavelengths. Research on the health effects of exposure to light in humans and other organisms is a growing field. And lighting technology has improved even since 2012, when the town first voted to include LED lighting in the town budget. Therefore, we think that it is important for public health that the Department of Health continue to work with the Departments of Public Works and Building to keep up to date with the latest information on lighting and public health and the technological advances in lighting so that the most healthful and cost-effective choices can be made for the town. Please vote for Article 17.
Thank you, Ms. Benka. Before Ms. Benka speaks, and while I remember it, the corrected vote is 111 on Article 15, is 111 to 83 to 7.
Carla Benka, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, speaking for the Advisory Committee. Several years ago, the town began to investigate using LED lighting on and in publicly owned properties. Perhaps most noticeable has been the DPW's conversion of high-pressure sodium streetlights to LEDs, piloted first on a few streets, and now a multi-year town-wide project supported with CIP funds approved by town meeting. The building department, too, has introduced LED lighting in public buildings. The garage underneath Town Hall is one example, and fixtures featuring 4,000 Kelvin LED lights have been tested at the Heath School. Research indicates that some types of LED lighting, particularly those that produce more blue light, although saving energy, also have the potential to interfere with human health and general well-being by affecting circadian rhythms and the secretion of melatonin, a hormone that helps to maintain these rhythms. Such findings caught the attention of the two principal petitioners of Article 17, one a physician and the other the director of roadway maintenance at Mass DOT. They have spent the past year researching the issue, meeting with scientists, and conferring with town hall staff. This article is the result of their efforts. While supporting the town's efforts to reduce its carbon footprint, the petitioners asked town meeting to support a resolution with three objectives. First, that the Building, Health, and Public Works departments take into account the impacts of new types of lighting on human health and well-being when considering the installation of such energy-conserving devices. Second, that they stay current with research in this area. And third, that they be flexible in approving light bulb specifications appropriate for indoor and outdoor use during both daytime and nighttime hours. It's to the credit of the heads of these three departments that such steps have already been initiated, and that the decision not to exceed 4,000 Kelvin, considered to be neutral white rather than bluish, in our streetlights was reached after discussions between the Health and Public Works departments. During their discussion of Article 17, advisory committee members noted that LED lights, while reducing energy usage and costs, are also likely to provide better lit streets and sidewalks, important for public safety. There was also consensus that future efforts should be made to equip the lights with smart technology so that they can be programmable, thus saving even more energy, reducing maintenance costs, and improving safety and security. Although the cost of programmable lighting is currently beyond the town's budget, the fixtures can be retrofitted for when the costs come down or additional funding becomes available. The advisory committee appreciates the time and effort of the petitioners, the responsiveness of DPW and the building and health departments, and the resolution's implicit recognition of the innovative and evolving nature of lighting technology. A near unanimous committee urges favorable action on the article. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gilman?
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3, speaking on behalf of the Green Caucus. I won't repeat Carla's excellent comments, but I wanted to point out something was less obvious to me. The question about the wavelength and interrupting sleep impacts every living thing. In fact, the biological processes of almost all living beings, plant and animal, are affected by light. So the blue light wavelength that the petitioners identified as being harmful to our cycles also adversely impact other organisms. Melatonin that I buy in a bottle basically signals the time of day to our genes and our organs. And the same melatonin suppression problems that we have with lights at night creates similar problems in other animals and plants. Biologists, in fact, describe melatonin as the most evolutionary conservative hormone that we know of. And that means that it's one of the oldest hormones known across all of life. The regulatory, this regularity is ingrained, in fact, into the DNA, and we are indebted to it for our survival. Natural light regularizes basic and fundamental biological activities across all species, from plants to us. So what I'm saying is every living creature is subject to circadian disruption. Many of the beings that rely on darkness do so to forage for food and to mate, and we coexist with them. So it behooves us not only to be mindful of our own circadian rhythms, but also those of every other living being. By a unanimous vote, the Green Caucus urges favorable action on warrant Article 17.
Thank you, Mr. Franco.
Ben Franco for the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen thanks the petitioners for bringing this issue to the attention of town meeting and agrees that it is important that the town remain apprised of the developing science concerning the health impacts of LED lights, and that this knowledge is considered as the LED program is deployed in Brookline. By a vote of 5-0, we recommend favorable action.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Heather Hamilton. I am from Precinct 3 and a town meeting member. This is my first time speaking in front of this body, so forgive my anxiety. I am a fellow petitioner on this warrant article, I work for the state. I work in building maintenance. I oversee the building maintenance department of the Massachusetts Turnpike. So we have had some experience changing over to LED lighting. One of the utility companies basically gave us a bunch of free lights, and we changed them out at our park and ride. And it's great. It brought our costs way down, but they are very bright lights, and I am very glad that I don't live anywhere near those park and rides. So a few things that I just want to touch base on about this warrant article. It's not prescriptive, which is the benefit of doing it in a resolution. We have met with a lot of people, and one of the fabulous things that we found out was how progressive the building department of Brookline has already been on this issue. They had already reached out to the Department of Public Health, and they had already taken steps to bring the lighting down to a level that won't be as disruptive. So we just wanted to bring forth this article to reinforce that they're doing what we in town meeting would like them to do, which is to take into consideration health effects as they start transitioning to this technology. One thing that hasn't been touched upon is the glare that can happen at night. This was brought up as a potential safety issue. A lot of the questions that Claire and I got asked early on was, well, if you kind of turn down the lighting at night, won't it be less safe? And actually, glare has been a big problem. I don't know if you've ever experienced it looking right into the headlights of another car. It kind of blinds you. So more light isn't always better for safety. So I just wanted to bring that up. I just want to conclude by urging you to vote favorable action. I want to thank my fellow petitioner, Claire Stamford. This was a really interesting way to learn more about town meeting and the process going before the advisory committee and the Board of Selectmen. So I thank the moderator and the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Council for a very interesting ride. Thank you.
Now, that wasn't so hard, was it? Mr. Richmond?
Richmond, Precinct 6. I want to thank also the petitioners. I'll certainly be supporting this article. I want to speak, though, as someone who is in a butter to some existing LED lights and some of my experience with it. I find the intensity is higher, the actual amount of light. I'm seeing more reflection. Certain cars, when they go by the lights, it's sort of like a sans lumière show of reflected light because these lights are so strong. And our old lights, while very energy inefficient, were warmer, and warmer means closer to yellow. And I find the lighting a little unnatural. I feel like I'm in a surgical operating theater on Washington Street where I live. And I would like it, I hope that future lights will be warmer and a little dimmer. So, as building upon Janie's remarks too, that this bright light can stress our trees, and some of the maple trees that I see across the street, which are basically underneath these street lights, we're dying early. So this is an important topic. I'm glad we're addressing it. And
thank you, Mr. Burstein.
Michael A. Burstein, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. Precinct 12, not 9 since 2009. Sorry, don't know where my brain is. I love everyone in 9 and 12. I'm just like to mention one thing that I hope everybody will take into account when they're considering lighting for the town under the warrant article. The general concept of light pollution. This may sound a little bit esoteric, but it doesn't just affect our health or the environment or ecology, but it also affects our ability to see the night sky, to do astronomy. For centuries, the human race was very much connected to the cycles of the stars, the moon, and with the advent of electronic lighting, we've become safer, we've become able to do a lot more at night, but it also has sort of cut us off from a part of the world. So there's often concerns about light pollution and the hope that street lighting is encouraged to keep people safe, but also give us a chance to still appreciate the sky. I remember a few years ago in Boston area, there was a blackout. My wife and I were walking home on a Friday night, and we were actually able to see the stars that are usually washed out by the lights of the town. So just something I wanted to put out there. Thank you.
On the motion on page 17-7, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Article 18. By the way, I need to make one more change to the electronic vote on Article 15. One of our colleagues made a mistake, and the final vote, I hope the final vote, is 112 in favor, 82 opposed, and 7 abstentions. Article 18, the motion is at the bottom of page 8-2 over to page 8-3, relating to, it's a resolution in support of respect and dignity for domestic workers, moved by Ms. Heller, seconded by Ms. Daly. I call on Mr. Vogel.
Hi, I'm Steve Vogel. I'm a resident at 166 Walnut Street in Precinct 5, and I'm co-chair of the Acting for Economic Justice Committee of Workmen's Circle, which is a national secular Jewish organization that has its headquarters of the local area in Brookline. In July of this year, the Mass Legislature passed a domestic workers Bill of Rights bill that basically, for the first time, has allowed domestic workers who are not ones that do not work through temp agencies, but work in the sort of informal economy, word of mouth, such as nannies, live-in or otherwise, personal care attendants, and housekeepers. These people had no legal rights, labor rights, for sick time, maternity time, protected time off, or actual being paid for all hours that they work. Right now, most domestic workers are women. Around half of them are the primary wage earners for their family, and roughly 2/3 of them earn below poverty wages. And the law passed. Regulations have not been written yet, and they're in the process of being written. Some of the legislation, some of the things that it will call for is for workers who work actually 16 hours or more a week will now have the right to have a contract. They'll have right to be paid for all hours worked. They'll have right to unpaid maternity leave, right for sick time, and this is basically bringing these workers rights that we all have in this country, in Massachusetts, and it's real important. You know, we have lots of labor trafficking in the United States still. Domestic workers are at risks, have safety risks, discrimination, sexual discrimination, and this law helps to protect them. The campaign is asking cities and towns to vote on resolutions in support for a number of reasons. One, as I mentioned before, the legislation is passed, but the regulations have not been written, and the thought is if lots of towns and cities pass resolutions, the campaign may be able to use that in order to push faster support and writing up of the regulations so that this can actually be enforced. Second of all, the passage of this bill did not receive a lot of publicity. Lots of people in the Commonwealth do not know anything about this, and that would include domestic workers, and certainly it would also include employers, many of which we have in town. Roughly 48% of the 25,000 plus residences in households in Brookline have children under 18. Roughly 20% have people who live there who are over 65. People in all these families often will have at some time in their lives, need for domestic help, whether it's house cleaning, whether it's nannies, personal care attendants for their elder family members. And so the need for domestic workers in Brookline, I can't tell you how many, but it's probably more substantial than we think.
You have 1 minute, sir.
Okay. But the passage of this resolution will not create any more costs to the town. What we're asking for is just vote of support, and then secondly, after regulations are written, basically having a process where we can publicize the regulations to the town. That would include, putting something on the town website, possibly having printed literature that we would be responsible for creating, put on town hall, libraries, and if and when we decide that it would be nice to have an educational event to basically explore all the rights and regulations involved, helping us to facilitate having a place to have the meeting. Thank you very much, and I hope you could all support it.
Thank you, Ms. Heller.
Nancy Heller, Town Meeting Precinct 18, and a member of the Advisory Committee speaking for that body. Article 18, as you've heard, is a resolution to make employers and domestic workers and other citizens involved in Brookline aware of the statute which passed over the summer, it's the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. That Bill of Rights does guarantee certain basic workplace rights which domestic workers have never had before, meal and rest breaks, clarity on what constitutes working time, sick time to care for themselves and their families, freedom from discrimination and sexual harassment, 24 hours off per 7-day calendar week, limited vacation and sick days, parental leave, illegal charges for food and lodging, so the protection against that, and protection from eviction without notice, and notice of termination. So it gives people rights that they never had before. In addition, as Mr. Vogel mentioned, provisions for maternity leave and a requirement for a written contract in this industry. The Attorney General is the one who is charged with promulgating regulations, supposedly by April 1st of 2015. The enforcement of this thing is on hold, basically, until the regulations will be adopted. But it's important, I think, and the Advisory Committee saw this, that the educational efforts around this resolution are important to inform people about what is coming and what employers and domestic workers can expect. The town would not really incur any expenses, certainly in terms of education. I would imagine that it would be, something would be on the website. I would imagine that if calls came into the town, they would be directed toward our new Department of Inclusion. The idea is also to, once materials are available that explain this law and explain the regulations, that the town would somehow make those available in Town Hall and perhaps on the website as well. We looked at a few cases, notorious cases that have been published in the Globe about the kinds of things that have been the enforced servitude, domestic servitude and forced labor that have happened in Massachusetts. There aren't many of them, but there are a few. And in both cases, the employers paid low or no wages. There were long hours of work. There were many promises made of better wages and working conditions, but those were never honored. So this bill is something long overdue. We focused on language of the resolution, and we made some wording changes primarily to clarify the educational purpose of the resolution. So I urge you to vote favorable action on the resolution, which is found on page 18-2 and 18-3 of your reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Do you have anything to add?
No, we're in favor.
The Board of Selectmen is in favor of this resolution. On the resolution at the bottom of page 18-2, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously, and Mr. Ditkoff wishes to be recorded as abstaining. Article 19. The main motion on Article 19 starts at the bottom of page 19-5 over to the bottom of page 19-6, moved by Ms. Oldham, seconded by Mr. Wyszynski. The town adopt a resolution opposing the expansion of natural gas through pipelines and hydraulic fracturing in Massachusetts. The advisory committee offers a substitute motion found on page 1 of the, pages 2 and 3 of the tan or cream-colored supplement, I guess, moved, and you'll have the difference explained to you by the speakers, but it's moved by Mr. Spiegel and seconded by Mr. Bors. This will be treated as a substitute resolution, which means essentially an amendment in toto. And I will, when it comes time to vote, we will vote first on the advisory committee's substitute motion. If that fails, we'll go to the main motion of the petitioners at the bottom of page 19-5. If it succeeds, it's as if we amended the main motion, and we will vote again on the advisory committee motion. So, against that complicated procedural background, I call on Ms. Oldham.
Thank you. Carol Oldham, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 11. I'm a co-petitioner on warrant Article 19, and I urge you to vote for the original Article 19 and not for the amendment. Article 19 opposes hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, and opposes expanding the Commonwealth's reliance on natural gas through building more pipelines, specifically Kinder Morgan's Tennessee Gas Pipeline. That pipeline would run across Massachusetts from the western part of the state to Dracut and would not be completed before the end of 2018 at the earliest. The resolution is intended to send a signal to the governor, the legislature, and the utilities and energy companies that Brookline wants to meet the Commonwealth's energy needs with renewables and energy efficiency rather than with more fossil fuels. That's consistent with our commitments we've made as a town and as a Commonwealth to decrease our climate change causing pollution and to move to cleaner energy sources. There are many reasons to move away from an over-reliance on fossil fuels. Climate change, price volatility, air and water pollution, and impacts on human health are just a few. You may hear from the amenders to the article that moving to renewables is not possible, that saving energy with energy efficiency is unrealistic, and that remaining reliant on fossil fuels is necessary, even though we all know that that is what is causing climate change. I have some good news. Not only can we move to more renewables and save money and decrease our energy use with energy efficiency, we already are. Because of the Global Warming Solutions Act and other Massachusetts state laws, we have commitments to get 25% of our energy from clean sources by 2025, and more solar and wind are getting installed here every year. Governor Patrick recently made a commitment to build 2,000 megawatts of wind off our shores, far enough out that views are not a problem. That will power 700,000 homes per year. Solar installations are taking off thanks to good state laws. 687 megawatts of solar are already up and running, including 10 projects on New Bedford schools that will save them $22 million in electricity bills over the next 20 years. And we're the #1 state for 4 years running in terms of energy efficiency, though we still have more to do because our building stock is older than much of the country. On the other hand, building this pipeline would lock us into using more and more fossil fuels for our energy. Right now, we produce more than 60% of our power with natural gas, a dangerous over-reliance on one fossil fuel source that makes us vulnerable to price increases. This pipeline is a massive infrastructure project projected to cost in the billions of dollars, costs that would be passed on to all of us through rate increases and special tariffs, as we have seen with other large projects for utilities. Energy companies and politicians follow where the people lead, and this resolution shows them what we value: clean energy and energy efficiency. The amendment offered by Dr. Spiegel strips out the opposition to the pipeline, which is inconsistent. There is no logic to stating, I don't like fracking, but give me more fracked gas. Our original motion, which I'm asking you to vote for, has the support of the Board of Selectmen, the Climate Action Committee, the Green Caucus, the Green Space Alliance of Brookline, and PAX Brookline. As I mentioned in an email to this august body, of the 39 towns in Massachusetts that have considered similar measures to oppose the pipeline, all of them have done so. Senator Warren said yesterday about the Keystone XL pipeline, the decisions that we make today about energy infrastructure will affect our kids and grandkids tomorrow. Instead of pushing a project that threatens our air and water, we should continue to fight for investments in clean energy technologies of the future. I agree with our senior senator, and I urge you to vote in favor of the original motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bors. Just to make it clear what we're talking about here, the advisory committee's motion to which Mr. Bors will address is at the bottom of page 2 of the supplement, starting with whereas and ending at the bottom of that page. It does not go over to page 3. Mr. Bors.
Well, now, there we go. That might work. Okay. Harry Bors speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee and the Advisory Committee's amended motion. Global warming is an immediate and pressing problem. It's clear what is contributing to this. It's us and our burning of fossil fuels for heat, for electricity, for transportation. What is less clear is what path we should take to wean ourselves from fossil fuels in the most efficient way. The resolution under Article 19 seeks to address this issue in terms both general and specific. It speaks in opposition to the process of hydraulic fracturing, which we just heard about. Fracking, as I assume most of you probably know, involves the pumping of a mix of water and toxic chemicals at high pressure underwater in order to fracture shale to release gas. Containment, disposal, decontamination of these fluids, among other things, present significant problems. Consequently, this process poses a real potential health hazard. The resolution also opposes the expansion of the use of natural gas, as well as the proposed Northeast Energy District project, that's the Kinder Morgan pipeline, as well as other pipelines. And this I assume we will hear more of tonight also. The petitioners contend that our energy needs must be met by a combination of energy efficiency, conservation, renewable energy resources, rather than the use of fossil fuels, including natural gas. As we noted in our original report, this article raises complex issues of climate change, economics, and energy politics. The committee wrestled with the idea of preventing pipelines for natural gas because of concerns over the need to displace other dirtier forms of fossil fuels, such as coal and oil. We also considered the potentially detrimental effects of rising energy prices on low-income households. The petitioners argue that we must reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. This is true. But many on our committee pointed out that even as we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, we will still be reliant to an extent on these fuels for some time to come. And they ask, shouldn't we then do what we can to ensure that at least we use the cleanest of these? Now, we will hear from speakers that our suppositions of the, quote, cleanest of natural gas are misplaced. Natural gas does not contribute to CO2 levels the way burning of coal and oil do. In fact, CO2 has been brought down by transition to natural oil. But leaked methane is lost and enters the atmosphere during the extraction and transmission phase with natural gas. Now, methane may in fact be a more potent contributor to global warming than CO2, but it is also far shorter lived in the atmosphere. Methane remains in the atmosphere for an average lifetime of about a dozen years, whereas CO2 can remain for centuries. So as we wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, methane levels in the atmosphere will drop, while carbon levels from these other fuels will still remain. Now, many of our members felt that we will continue to use this mix of fossil fuels, that natural gas is the cleaner alternative to these, and access to it for our region will allow us to continue to move away from coal and oil. They view natural gas as a, quote, bridge fuel. Now, there were others on our committee, however, that really believe that this is about changing behavior, and they maintain that creating more supply simply reinforces demand and eliminates any incentive for change. They point out that as supply increases, price decreases, and with reduction in price comes an increase in use.
1 minute.
Use that we must curtail. This led us to a broader discussion on our committee of energy prices in general and the possible effects on low-income households. According to the utilities, electric prices have risen by more than 30% as a consequence of limited access to natural gas. These cost increases touch us all, but certainly touch those of lower income more. In the end, the committee felt that a statement regarding the potential hazards of hydraulic fracturing, the need to conserve and become more efficient, and the need to develop energy alternatives was important. Views diverged, however, with regard to specifically asserting that we should limit our access to natural gas or single out for curtailment an essential infrastructure for energy distribution in our region. This is why the committee refrained from specific references to natural gas pipelines in its revised motion, though the feelings on our committee were mixed. Consequently, the committee reconsidered its initial recommendation and now recommends by a plurality 11-6-7, a more focused and reduced amended resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leckler.
All right, well, let me begin. My name's Ed Leckler. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8, and I'm speaking in favor of the original warrant. You cannot understand why the Kinder Morgan pipeline cannot be built without placing it in the context of climate change. Here are recent images of climate-related disasters. The center image is a recent tornado in Oklahoma. Well, we've always had tornadoes, right? Yes, but climate disasters have been increasing lately, as shown in this plot. The number of billion-dollar climate disasters in the United States is a function of time. In the 1980s, we had approximately 2 per year. In the last 10 years, there have been approximately 7.4. Well, if you could see the whole thing, you would see that. Based on careful surveys like this one, we know that 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is real, caused by humans, is serious, and must be addressed. Now, if 97% of oncologists told you to take a particular anti-cancer drug in order to have the best chance of survival, you'd listen, right? And if 97% of engineers said, don't drive off that bridge, it'll collapse, you wouldn't drive off that bridge. So what are those 97% of climate scientists telling us? That if we take steps now, serious but doable steps, we can avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But what do they say concretely? Well, you can't see it. That currently fossil fuel burning is projected to continue increasing at 3% per year. It's increasing 3% per year. And yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm trying to get it to come up here. There we go. And we'll go back. Yeah. But I think we don't have time for doing display settings. I apologize. This should work, and it's not. Oh, boy. All right, well, we'll deal with that. All right, 97% of climate scientists are telling us that we have to decrease our fossil fuel usage by 6% per year. Now let's turn specifically to the pipeline. New England governors commissioned a report about New England's future energy needs. That report had something called the high demand scenario, which led to the conclusion that we need that pipeline. Here is New England's projected natural gas usage based on the high demand scenario. And if you notice, it has that 3% increase per year in fossil fuel usage. The New England Governor's Report also had a low demand scenario, and notice in this case, natural gas usage is flat. We achieve the low demand scenario by coping by using alternatives, energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable energy projects. Is that viable? It absolutely is. Now, we've heard that natural gas is a better fossil fuel than coal or oil in terms of climate change. However, natural gas is mostly methane, and methane leaks at every point during extraction and distribution. And whether natural gas and methane is better than coal depends upon how much leakage there is. Here's a recent science paper that says that leakage is low enough that burning natural gas is better than burning coal or oil. There are a few such papers. Here are 2. But there are also numerous articles, all of these from 2014, except one, that say that the opposite is true, that methane leakage is so great that methane is as bad, if not worse, than coal and oil. And here's a 5th paper with satellite images for the whole region of the United States showing that it's very bad. I find these papers showing methane worse than coal and oil to be, on balance, more compelling and more worrisome. And proponents on the other side, of course, feel the opposite. And given such a situation,
how can we think about increasing our dependency on natural gas or methane? So ask yourself this question. Are you willing to bet the future of the Earth's climate on promoting methane when we are not sure whether methane is not just as bad, if not worse, than coal or oil?
1 minute.
Do you really want to commit to massive, expensive new infrastructure with this level of uncertainty? Does that make sense? Especially for roughly the same cost, we can switch to renewables, which have no climate impact. We're at a historic crossroads. We can switch to renewables, which have no climate impact. We can do things differently. It's not going to be easy, but if we make the right decisions, we can do our part. There's no way that Massachusetts can build that pipeline and cut fossil fuel usage 6% per year. Massachusetts must set an example for climate change. No pipeline. Please vote no on the amendment. Vote yes on the original warrant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Selwyn.
Lee Selwyn, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13, member of the Advisory Committee, although I'm speaking for myself. Those who are opposing the Advisory Committee's proposed amendment have really failed to provide a linkage between reducing the supply of natural gas by blocking construction of a pipeline and the shift to either renewable energy or other non-environmentally difficult solutions. The correct solution to combating climate change is to address demand, not supply. If you cut supply of one source of energy, such as natural gas, without addressing demand, what you end up doing is shifting use to other sources of non-renewable energy components that have other consequences. For example, if we don't have a pipeline to deliver natural gas, we have more reliance on LNG. If an LNG tanker coming into Boston Harbor were to blow up, and this is not something that hasn't been considered, it would take half the city with it. There have been accidents on rail cars containing LNG. In our lifetime, we've seen 3 nuclear plants, one in the United States, one in Russia, one in Japan, have serious accidents that resulted in they're not only being shut down, but in serious consequences for the immediate environment. Wind has produced side effects that weren't initially contemplated. We've seen a great deal of noise pollution, prompting, for example, residents in Falmouth to try to shut down just 2 wind turbines. And we don't know what the consequences of the 160 that are yet to be turned on in Nantucket Sound. We need to be looking at ways to reduce demand, and the proposal to simply cut out supply doesn't accomplish that. If natural gas becomes less available and we have more reliance on coal, we have more reliance on oil, the environmental impact could be far greater. We're also looking at massive increases in electric rates in Massachusetts, which will have a number of consequences, some of which haven't really been addressed. There's been a push, for example, for increased use of electric vehicles. But electric vehicles use electricity, and electricity in this state, at least, is heavily dependent upon natural gas. So if you move people in that direction and then you cut out the supply of gas, raising electric rates, that would discourage the use of electric vehicles. The point here is that nothing is free. The correct approach is to look at demand, and if you simply focus on curtailing supply, as the proponents of this article are suggesting, the effect, there are unintended consequences and unanticipated consequences that haven't been addressed. We should be looking, obviously, for ways of reducing demand, and the town, for example, has been converting to LED lights, although we heard just earlier this evening about some of the consequences of that.
1 minute.
The point is that in order to get to the outcome that we want, we have to take a more comprehensive approach rather than a singular approach that's being suggested here. I urge you to support the advisory committee's version and if adopted, support the resolution with that amendment. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Connors, you might as well have a seat because we're going to hear for 4 more speakers, and I will then promise that you'll get your, not, I have Mr. Wyszynski next, Mr. Richmond.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
You can fight it out between yourselves if you wish.
Neil Wyszynski for the Board of Selectmen. Climate change, as you've hopefully heard and are convinced by now, is a fact, not a theory, and it's probably the biggest challenge of our generation. And in recognition of the destructive effects of burning fossil fuels, we have federal and state incentives to begin to wean us off fossil fuels towards renewables like wind and solar. In Brookline, we have the Selectmen's Climate Action Committee, which has been working to institutionalize climate-friendly policies and practices within town government, increase our awareness of climate change, and working with citizens through programs such as Solarize to reduce our carbon footprint. Countering this has been the recent fracking boom, which has brought abundant, relatively inexpensive natural gas back to the U.S. and reduce the economic incentives to move to renewables. It's even begun to pressure companies to begin exporting natural gas, and this brings us to the resolution. We all on the Board of Selectmen agree on the need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and to support a ban on fracking in Massachusetts, as stated in both the petitioners and the advisory committee amendment. A majority of the board agrees with the petitioners that we should oppose the pipeline and that it promotes fracking and works against the long-term need to move towards renewables. Therefore, a majority of the board urges favorable action on the petitioner's version. The minority on the board is reluctant to promote an action which artificially restricts the regional supply of this vital resource and drives up the price locally. Recent increases in the cost of electricity are signs of possible things to come if the supply is restricted. Shortages and price hikes could even promote switching back to things like coal with its associated soot and particulate emissions in addition to the climate change issues. So a minority of the board urges a vote for the advisory committee resolution. We have a split board. So the board thanks the petitioners for bringing increased awareness of climate change to the town.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Stanley Spiegel from Precinct 2, and I was the person who brought the amended version to the advisory committee, which then voted in support of it. And one might ask, why am I standing here? One might say spitting into the wind, as some have advised me, in pressing for this amended version. I like wind power, but that's not the reason. The reason is that I believe the town meeting should be acting on the basis of facts, should not be making symbolic votes, send signals, send messages, send statements, but instead of being carried away by emotion, think through complex problems and think of the nuances. We've had a couple of recent occasions I could mention where we voted for all good intentions on things which have come back to bite us. I mentioned in something I sent out earlier the plastic bag ban that we voted a couple of years ago, nobody wanted to have an increased carbon footprint. But what's happened as a result of that plastic bag ban is a humongous increase in the amount of paper bags, which use more carbon in production and in transportation and so on, emit other pollutants, and we've increased our carbon footprint. It wasn't intentional, but it happened. More recently, we voted a neighborhood conservation district for Hancock Village. We wanted to save that from the development. Instead, we've got a 40B coming, which will be a worse development than could have been built by right. Sometimes our actions turn out to have unintended consequences that nobody wanted. And I would submit that this can happen here too. There seems to be some magical thinking, wishful thinking, call it what you will, that if we only cut this pipeline out and therefore send a signal or a message or reduce the supply of natural gas into the region, that the gap, and there will be a gap in energy, will be to fill in with renewables. They're not ready yet. They're not shovel ready or market ready. What is ready is coal. There will be coal or there will be LNG tankers because people will want to have their homes heated, they will want to have electric power, and we're already seeing that we don't have enough natural gas transmission to provide the electric power that's needed. There have been rates by National Grid and by NSTAR of 29, 37%, and those rates affect people. They affect our neighbors. About, as you may have seen if you read this, almost 1/3 of the residents of the town of Brookline are in financial straits. This is not helping them. These are our constituents. These are the people we represent. And we mustn't be throwing them under the bus on some speculation that things will work out the way we want them to. We all want renewables. We all want a future in which we don't have to worry about the use of fossil fuels. And we can get there and we will get there. But the thing to do now is, I don't believe, to cut down the supply and cause hardships to the people among whom we live. Let me give you an alternate scenario where actually the amount of natural gas, the ease of natural gas, can be helpful to this future. If by energy sufficiency, which we now have, and reduced reliance on Middle Eastern oil, we might very well not have the need for the military presence we right now spend tons of money on in the Middle East. And if that's the case, there'd be money left for us to invest as a country in the kind of renewable and production and investment and development of renewable resources that we need. This is a complex problem, and it is not given to knee-jerk solutions or to facile solutions or to feel-good solutions. I'll even introduce some heresy about fracking. This may come, as I say, as heresy, but the jury is not out on fracking. Yes, there are some cases where fracking seems to be causing difficulties. There are other cases where testimony exists and data exists that there's no problem with fracking. We need to know where it's a problem, where it isn't, and if it is, can it be mitigated? We don't know, and we can't simply say fracking. I favor a moratorium until we find some of these things out, but that doesn't mean that we right now can, with great confidence, say we hate fracking. The case isn't made. The case isn't made that coal is a cleaner fuel, as some have stated, than natural gas.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There are one scientific statement from a scientist in Cornell who makes that claim, but the Union of Concerned Scientists and a Stanford University study all say it ain't so in the long term, in the matter of centuries, which is what we have to worry about. So there's a lot of speculation going on, and we're being asked to come up with a specific recommendation. I hope we won't do that. I hope we will take a nuanced view. We will think about what makes sense based on the evidence we have, set emotions aside, try to be rational, reasonable, and believable so that the resolutions we pass can be respected and have some weight. I thank you for your consideration, and I wish everybody here a happy Thanksgiving and a wonderful Christmas season.
That's outside the scope of the article.
I understand that, but I wish it to you as well as everybody else. Take care, everyone.
Mr. Richmond?
Clint Richmond, Precinct 6. Good evening. In case I run out of time, I'm going to cut right to the chase. Vote no on the substitute motion and yes on the original article.
Thank you very much.
I have 5 more minutes, Mr. Moderator. I intend to use them. This is not a energy master plan that we're proposing tonight, but a response to the Kinder Morgan and Algonquin pipelines, which you'll hear more about, which go as close as West Roxbury. This article is not about reducing natural gas, which is the usage of which has already exploded. It's gone from a small percentage of our electricity production to half. We're trying to halt the expansion of natural gas. We're trying to halt a profit-making pipeline that's being financed by us in Brookline as ratepayers. Next slide, please. Even the proponents of the amended resolution are against fracking, although they seem to be one of them seems to be backpedaling about that. But this map here will illustrate the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which is the one that's furthest along, and you can see the star on the left is an existing junction to the fracking fields in Pennsylvania, and it connects, this is the supply segment, 135 miles to Schoharie, New York, and then 177 miles to Dracut. This is the pipeline that we're talking about this evening. The company that's doing, as you heard, is Tennessee Gas. And as I said, there's competition for this profitable business of supplying us with this fossil fuel, and I mentioned the Algonquin pipeline. Next slide, please. We've heard a little bit about the cost, maybe you saw it in the explanation. This is a huge investment. The estimates range from $1 to $3 billion, and there are various ways to finance this project. Tariffs and pipeline financing are quite complex, but one of them, and that was originally proposed by Tennessee Gas, was a special tariff to do accelerated cost recovery of the pipeline costs, the capital costs. So it could essentially be a zero-risk project. I'm surprised they're not offering to sell us shares in this windfall. It's being heavily subsidized. Next slide, please. Natural gas is harmful. The combustion of all fossil fuels generates local air pollution. Nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, methane is lethal. Natural gas is mainly methane. The leaks from the underground distribution pipes kill trees. They're a danger to our home. It's one of the reasons we have special detectors, and that they add an odor so that you can detect it. This is a toxic gas we're playing with here. It's highly flammable. I certainly agree with everything that everybody said about LNG. We're not proposing more LNG, and we don't think any more is capable. But these high-pressure natural gas pipelines and stations are high risk of accidents and even terrorist attacks. Next slide, please. Natural gas is not sustainable. Fossil fuels are non-renewable. The extraction process, especially fracking, is highly destructive. It requires massive amounts of water, millions of gallons per well. And there are dozens, if not hundreds of these wells in the Marcellus area, which extends all the way, I should say, almost to the Massachusetts border, which is why our resolution calls for disallowing the storage or disposal of fracking products in our state. The fracturing fluid is this toxic stew of hundreds of chemicals. There are earthquakes that, in effect, it's breaking up the shale in our case, in the Marcellus case. So imagine living above these drilling sites. It can contaminate the drinking water and release so much methane that's leaking all over that you can see videos on YouTube of people setting their water on fire. Next slide, please.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Pipelines are harmful. It's a massive new series of structure requiring hundreds, perhaps 1,000 acres of land just in Massachusetts alone. Remember, this is a 300-mile pipeline. Conservation lands, wildlife reserves, state parks, and farmland. All this can be acquired by eminent domain at the federal level, overriding all our local laws. Habitat destruction and interruption. A permanent property easement removing this land from other uses, including recreational. It becomes off limits. I agree. Next slide, please. I agree with Mr. Selman that reducing demand is our most important priority. Energy efficiency is often called our first fuel. We're spending billions in the state. That's why we're the leader, as Carol mentioned. And some of this is also funded by our tariffs, and we think that's a good thing. Conservation, still relevant. Increasing and diversifying the supply. We cannot be reliant on natural gas. That's how you end up with the price spikes that have been referenced. So in
Please
conclusion,
conclude, Mr. Richmond.
I've already given you my conclusion. I've given you a whole other set of reasons to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Connors.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Patricia Connors, Precinct 3. The Environmental Defense Fund has an interactive map of gas leaking pipes in the Boston metro area, and it includes Brookline. So there are several leaks in the Brookline area of low and medium level. But there is, according to this map, a high methane leak on Route 9, very close to the old Lincoln School. Now, I read some time ago that the town of Brookline is in negotiations with the National Grid regarding these Brookline leaks, which, because it's natural gas, it's mostly methane. And I was hoping that we could get a status of the negotiations, if in fact there are negotiations with National Grid, and also some verification of whether or not there is this high methane leak on Route 9 near the old Lincoln School.
Ms. Murphy.
Good evening, Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council. I'm not familiar with the negotiations you're referring to. I know that there is a tax matter that the Assessor's Department is pursuing along with outside counsel. As for the existence of a methane leak, I'm not familiar with that.
Thank you, Dr. Vitolo.
Tommy Vitolo, Town Meeting.
Well, we'll hear what Dr. Vitolo has to say, and then I may entertain that motion. Dr. Vitolo?
My job is to work as an expert witness on bulk electric power cases in New England and elsewhere in the country. This is what I do for a living. And without commenting on whether or not we should vote yay or nay, I am interested in helping Mr. Spiegel with a few facts. The first is that with regards to coal, in 2011, New England had about 3,000 megawatts. The country had about 100 times that. In 2020, we will have no more than 1,000 megawatts in New England. We can't build any more coal plants because of EPA's 111B. And the reason why so many plants are retiring is CARE, CASPER, NACS, MATS, 316B, CCR, and effluent regulations, which essentially mean if you own a coal plant in New England, it costs far more money to bring it up to compliance than it does to simply retire it and build something else. So there's absolutely no way that we will have more coal generation in the future than we did in the past, regardless of this pipeline. With regards to LNG, the price of LNG is so much higher than alternatives because of a combination of European demand for liquefied natural gas and demand in Japan, that there's also no way that we will be using LNG to meet a substantial amount of our energy needs. It's simply far more expensive than other options, including bunker fuel, oil. So I just want to make it clear that regardless of the future of this Kinder Morgan pipeline, we're not going to have more generation in New England from coal, and we're not going to have substantially more generation in New England from liquefied natural gas. Thank you.
There was a motion for the question. Is there a second? Okay, I have the following speakers who signed up in advance to speak in favor of the main motion. Ms. Wentz, Ms. Heller, Ms. Gilman, and Mr. Lescoyer. You see Mr. Clafter and Ms. Kahn at the microphones. I will allow that motion. You too.
And me. And me, Mr. Honor.
All those in favor of The motion to terminate debate, it requires a two-thirds vote. Please raise your hands. Those opposed, motion carries by a two-thirds vote. We will vote first on the advisory committee substitute motion. On the second page of supplement number 2, Mr. Richmond.
Recorded vote, please.
And if there are 35 town meeting members who would like a recorded vote on this motion, we will have one. This is on the motion on page 2 of supplement number 2. This is advisory committee AC motion, Article 19. And you may fire when ready. Those in favor of this motion, please stand and press 1. You may be seated. Those opposed, stand and press 2. Well, it was, the motion failed by a vote of 19 in favor, 145 opposed, and I don't know how many abstentions, but they're usually about 5. 8? Okay, 8 abstentions. On the, motion fails. On the main motion, on the bottom of page 19-5, those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. That concludes our business. I'd like to thank all of you for the uncommonly high level of debate, especially tonight. And I call for a motion to dissolve the fall town meeting. Is there a second? Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Town meeting is dissolved. Please remember to turn in your handheld devices.